Okay, so we will start because we have our man of the hour, Frater Ram. We'll call him Frater Ram. I'll have to think of a name for you, Ram. Frater Singapura. We'll call him Frater Singapura. I think that's cool. Lion Island. Um, we have, of course, Frater Psychid. That's a amalgamation of psychic and kid. So that's for obviously Matt, and then obviously Solar. You know yours is Frater Dark Lord. And if anyone's curious, I'm Frater Aeon 818. You can see that I spent some time thinking about this today. Okay, so there we go. We have Mansion Rollers. Thank you for coming, Mansion Rollers. Obviously, this is a plus ultra space, so we just take it as the foundation that magic is very much real and alive in the world. And what is magic? Well, I think that it is both the combination of will and perhaps even love. So that's kind of the basis, at least for these spaces. And so the Plus Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, Aetherpunk, a series within a series, part of the larger Welcome to Hyperborea Speculative Gnostic Gospel. This is part 5, or arc 5, part 2, Technologies of a Hyperspace Kingdom. Of course, this idea was generated by Ram, who, or Frater Singapore as we'll call him. He really wanted us to do a solar punk series, and obviously this is where the Grey Lodge is a co-magical sort of co-creative. Yeah, it's a little Discordian. Like, we're a little chaos magic, I would say, in the sense that we're talking about meta ontologies broadly, meta magic, meta realities, meta history, meta politics, meta everything, but especially meta fiction. So that's why we always say this is also a speculative space. So everything we say in it is simply speculative. You can take it as true or you can discard it as you will. So just some notes. I'm obviously Jin the Ninja. Not obviously, but I'm Jin the Ninja. I co-host these space. I moderate these space with my amazing co-hosts. We have 2 co-hosts who are not here tonight. We have Mr. or I guess Frater. We'll do Frater for everyone because I actually did have a funny bit for Joshua. I know he's camping, but Joshua is Frater. He used to be Frater Severity, but actually he is now Frater Mildness. So he actually got an upgrade. He increased in his knowledge. And hello, Bulgari Free, Dakini of the Lodge. So Frater Mildness, aka Joshua the Branch, he is a very excellent podcaster as well as a good friend to the Lodge, and he is a brother among the co-hosts. So shout out to him and shout out to Frater Montgomery Carlo, who does not get a name because he's been podcasting for so many years that, Monty's just Monty. So that's already his name. So he's Frater Montgomery Carlo. And obviously we appreciate him. But tonight I am joined by, and maybe Monty will make an appearance later, but of course we have Frater Matt Murrah, Kabbalah, Tarot, all around spiritual. And I know that's not even the word. It's not even spiritual. It's the magic. He kind of represents the synthesis of the magical and technological, and so he comes to bring his amazing knowledge is to us. Knowledge is plural to us. Thank you so much, Matt. You are a valued brother, as well as co-host, as well as Logi, as well as everything. And of course, we all do this in synthesis. We transcend time and fucking space on an app called X in space, and we do this thing. And we've been doing it for 8 months. And of course, I did not forget you, Solar. Of course, I call him Frater Dark Lord because he is, we'll say, sitting on my left hand side, and he is just an amazing dude all around. I think of him as my friend. I hope he, whatever. So because he obviously has a deep knowledge of things that I was admittedly uncomfortable with sometimes simply because of the framing of the things around the system. But he has taught me the importance of having a flexible and sort of being able to look at things simply for their ideas. So thank you so much, Frater Dark Lord. And I appreciate you. And Evola, episode 54, coming very soon. Matt Murrah, we are recording in several days. That is coming very soon. Sir John, Frater John, has arrived. Fracture Space Awakened, and his episode will also be coming soon. And we are co-hosting, or he will be my co-host on an interview with Ernst Wilhelm. So I think that'll be very cool. And I was recommended uh, Ernst by everyone's favorite, besides John, of course, but everyone's other favorite Twitter astrologer, Joe Tier Astrology, who has some very anti-libtard, generally excellent astrology takes, and it's just a cool Tibetan Buddhist, and he lives in. He's just a very cool person, and he just he's like he's a wizard. He's a wizard, and he lives among beautiful Tibetan objects, and that's his life. Okay, so we have Bull Brave Free, obviously Dakini from the Lodge. Thank you so much for coming, member since the very beginning. Dakini, we appreciate you. We invite you. We consensually ask you to rectify the space as as the Dakinis often can do. And so thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you. I'm sorry that I set the space early last week. I know it was a little early, but I did it for a reason, because I had someone who really said that they could not schedule a show at any other time, and then they ended up canceling. So, but that is how it goes. Okay, and we have, of course, Frater Joseph Reed. I call him Dr. Joseph Reed because he is our Marshall McLuhan Scholar in Residence, artist in residence, our metamagician of medium as the message. It's pretty fucking cool. Thank you so much, Joseph. We really appreciate you. I don't know how you found our spaces initially, but you've been coming, and now you're part of the lodge, and now you're part of this whole fucking thing that we're doing, this speculative, metafictional, metamagical space that we talk about, futurist, utopianist, but not utopianist in a retard way. Like I think we're looking at more pragmatic. We're very Path 22. I mean, that's what it is. That's what the Aeon of the Daughter is, Path 22. Rectification between what Frater Achad said and what Nema said for the Aeon of Mot. They said Binah and Hod respectively, but I, of course, have to be a little different, of course, and I think my Kabbalah is a little better, of course, and so Path 22 makes sense to me. It is the tension of the bow and the arrow, you could say. So we are going to try and let that arrow be free tonight, as we always do. Mookie, our crow-faced Dakini, thank you so much for coming all the way from, well, we won't say, but I know where you are, but Europe. Thank you so much for coming. Much appreciated. Please bring your blessings and all that. I already asked Bullberry Free. We invoke the Dakinis within the conceptual space of the Hypaethral uh, electronic temple, we could say. And so we open the gates and please bless the space with, transmute the excess heat and the aggregates into love. And the boys will do their best to transmute it into will. And then Mansion Roller, thank you so much. Longtime mutual. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate your support on the timeline. I see you. We welcome you, and I hope you enjoy our space. So I will let our two co-hosts, well, my two co-hosts, I should say, my two co-hosts, and of course each other's co-host. I will let them introduce themselves, say whatever they want to say. Solar, you should plug your episode with Dr. Flowers, simply because I think that was is a pretty big fucking deal. I think for me it was. I felt like a lot of pressure, and I felt like I had to not embarrass you and also not embarrass myself. So if you want to plug that, I mean, I just plugged it for you, but if you want to plug it, that's okay. Absolutely. And please plug anything you want to plug. And Matt, of course, do the same.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Yeah, happy to be here, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I've got episode 54 in the can. It's ready when it's ready, or it'll drop when it drops. Yeah, I was very blessed and honored to be asked on to Occult Rejects. So it was my first time being on that show. So I was a little nervous for that. And then obviously it was a big deal for me to be able to get to talk to Dr. Flowers for several hours. So it was kind of beautiful. Hopefully my questions, progressed things and generated some interesting responses. I think they did. But maybe I'm a little biased because I was thinking about him for a while. so yeah, that was very cool, and I'm looking forward. I won't say anything specific, but we might have some other things in the works, in the future, and I'm looking forward to all that stuff as well.
Awesome. Yeah, your questions blew everyone out of the water. They blew me out of the water, and I know how smart you are, at least approximately. So, um, that was my one concern, was like how much better your questions are going to be, in the sense that like I want to equally match you, but in my own from my own angle.
Well, the
So
thing is too, man, like some people are made for the podcast and the roundtable and all that stuff. And I just knew going into it that Dr. Flowers is not that kind of guy. Like he is an academic, and in all of his presentations, like with the temple and all that stuff, like he presents himself as an ipsissimus and an academic. So I brought questions to him that were in the vein of a question that I would ask him based on those experiences. And I don't know that it actually makes for great like roundtable podcast content. You know what I mean? Like they were way more formal and precise than I would normally like, present in a sort of flowing conversation. But like he wasn't there to just converse and hang out, so I wasn't going to pretend to be there for
absolutely,
that either.
absolutely. No, you that's 100% fair. I still think you did A plus. I gave you, gold star, platinum star, mithril star, all the stars. I don't know everything. I thought you did great, and it was, it's a challenge. I'm not a huge roundtabler. The only time I really enjoy roundtabling, I'm just going to be perfectly frank, is when we do this. It's really and I know I'm kind of like the crypto boss, we could say, but I mean, I give everyone their due time, and I would always obviously accept any challenge from a co-host, in the sense of like, if I'm saying something that they don't agree with, that's fine. We'll be friends. We can, we can rectify as we go. We don't. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be conflict, but sometimes interesting ideas arise. Also, in like a conceptual conflict, like you're testing the fire of Gevra, you're testing your ideas in it. So I welcome that, but I think that this is the best because I get to hang out with like everybody I like from our lodge, and also we get to do something that's innovative and cool. So, and I'll know I'm a big ex hipster, so I do like anything that is cool. Okay, Matt, sorry, please go ahead.
Yes, Matt Mora. So, as Jin already said, bringing the synthesis of spirituality and technology. Pretty much trying to get the password out of this escape room. But yeah, I mean, if you like this kind of stuff, just make sure to follow me. I'm coming back to making videos. Had some nice synchronicities for this, so gotta also appreciate the invite for Jin's podcast. Let's see how it goes. Pretty excited. Also have two very nice episodes on the Greyhorns podcast, two long ones as well. But
Shout out
yeah, and
Stein.
playing
Shout out
around.
Stein. I'm
Shout out
round
Stein.
tabling with him soon, so I will definitely drop your episode, name drop it like 10 times, as many as humanly acceptable. I will make sure it's name dropped.
Thank you, thank you. It was actually pretty good. The one with the other guy, Blackwall, was very nice. But yeah, and aside from content, also doing some apps here and there. So planning to do a very nice one. I already mentioned last week. I'm gonna mention again because today I also saw something very interesting in this lens, which is the like you write your name and you get the music out of it. So yeah, let's see how that goes. But for now, it's only conceptual. It's not gonna share any links or something.
Well, I will say this, Matt. You did do those. The two long form episodes I saw that Stein generously sent me were excellent, truly excellent. I mean, I'm not your teacher, but I feel proud every time. Like, because you're young, and like I just am like, yeah, you're doing it. You're fucking doing it. You're young. I wish I was like 22 and doing it. Like, not. I don't want to be 22, but I'm saying that I envy you in a way, because you're doing, like, talking about the things that I desperately wanted to discuss, but it was really difficult to find. I'm not saying it was like there weren't people talking about magic and all that stuff, but it was just so. I mean, you guys know how I am, so it was just very pagan heavy where I was, and just like I had a hard time like kind of reframing it conceptually. And I'm just comfortable in tantra. It's just that was meant for me. Like, that was like my jar. I must have had karma in the past life that just was said that this was going to be fruitful for you, like Buddhism and Tantra Dharma specifically. So for me, that's kind of how everything came to a genesis and came. Obviously, Solar has been asking me to like reformulate, redo, perhaps even, and I'm gonna redo them. The Tantra and Kabbalah series. I think it's a series worthy of like a fresh start, and I think that it actually is in a way the foundation for Aeon of the Daughter, because that is where that idea came from. So, as many of you know in the chat, I've been reading Frater a Chad and a little bit of the Nema book, Metamagic, and sort of comparing like the way I traveled up the tree with the daughter and with Lalita Tribur and like their models, and they obviously prefer a more Egyptian model, and I agree that it is mod like that's they're right. They just I don't agree with their positioning. So I'm thinking about that in context to how I arrived at that idea of Path 22. Like, why did I sort of pick that? Because it feels very pragmatic. It feels very, it's very, as John would use it's a very balancing, it's the scales. It's a very balanced icon. So I love that. And it's, of course, Lamed. Okay, yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask before you. Is it legit a chad or is it a chad? I'm just like, is he trying to be Jewish or not? I don't know. Anyway, is that worth checking out just kind of for its own sake? Because like I was not aware of this work at all, and then all of a sudden in the last couple weeks, like it's come up heavily as you've kind of, I don't know, explored a little bit of the sort of the history of the concept of Aeon of the Daughter, right? Like as it's evolved over the last like 70 years, right? It's fascinating stuff. I really only care about it from your angle, but like, there's some derivative interest. Is it worth actually going back and checking out his work?
So so this will I think will be really interesting to you, to be honest. He's writing about Buddhist ideas, like in his visions of the crystal cave. He like that's if you know like the earlier tantras, I'm talking about like pre-Guya Garba. There's a couple Nyingma tantras in that are earlier than that. That are the one of them is even called Visions of a Crystal Cave. And if you look at the icon of like that he used, obviously it's very Rosicrucian. He obviously thought he was of the I don't know if this will interest you, Solar, but he thought he was of the Great White Brotherhood in the sense that he believed that there were magi for the new Aeon that were supposed to do these kind of Ma'at workings. So all in all, he felt like his Aeon of Ma'at, which I had no idea about either. So obviously, shout out Ram. I'm sorry, I should have done it right at the beginning. But Ram started sending me these blog posts from a guy named Denny Sargent. So Denny Sargent was a student of Nema. Nema was this other lady in the 90s, 1995. She wrote a book called Ma'at Working. It's all OTO stuff. I don't know anything about the OTO. But to answer Solar's question, each one is a Kabbalistic response to the other. So in a Kabbalistic way, in the way that I think of it, I think it's really fucking interesting. And in the sense of synthesis, I think it's really fucking interesting because they independently, like I independently arrived at this idea. And I named it after the book, and I've said this, Crossing the Abyss and the Aeon of the Daughter, which was written by Frater Ajad or Achad, whatever. But yeah, he was not the occultist of he was like pro Kabbalah. He was like, we're gonna look at it through this lens. Like he was much more Golden Dawn influenced. And Crowley said, like, oh, this guy's like, he's like a fucking retard because he doesn't totally agree with my Geveratic Aeon of Horus sort of way I've written it out. And so Frater Achad said, no, I'm actually going to rectify this Babylon working that you've kind of put into the world through obviously other people, but through Crowley specifically. And so he's like, I'm going to rectify this. And then this other lady started to do it. She's obviously was a very skilled Kabbalist, and so she's kind of rectified it. She had a different sort of Sephirotic conclusion, you could say, and so then I arrive at Path 22 independently, not knowing any of this fucking stuff. Rom sends it to me. I'm like, Anne of the Daughter, let's fucking go. Denny Sargent was talking about this in like the early 2000s, and he's gotten into some. I mean, I'm not slagging the dude, but like werewolf magic's a little outside of my own realm of expertise or knowledge or sort of awareness. But um, I'm interested in his earlier work, and so I think it's worthwhile, and I think it's definitely interesting to like independently arrive at that, and then it to come into fullness. And I think that the tantra aspect actually gives it more life. I think it resolves some of the issues that arose through using the strictly Egyptian system, not because the Egyptian system is flawed or the Golden Dawn's kind of like Kemetic Kabbalah, we'll call it. I think that the Tantra, because as I've said, Dakinis are empty, Sephira are empty. So maybe the closest experience that you can have, like the most one to one of it, is between like those Dakini and Sephirotic experiences. I just think it's an interesting idea because that is, if I think you know this, Solar, is like something I've kind of spoken about, is like that's sort of how I started gaining understanding. I started listening to people talk about Kabbalah, both seriously and not seriously, but not just Kabbalah. It wasn't just that because I already kind of knew things. It was hearing them talk about Sephirotic experiences, colors, ideas, those things. And then I would relate it to Dharma talks I had heard, my own experiences, of course, my own understanding of the text, my own textual knowledge. So it's all the things. It was all those three things brought together in synthesis, plus the hearing, which obviously relates to Hesed. So interesting. But yeah, so that's what it is. It was totally independent, and then these other people, obviously in the past, and famously, and as I said, interestingly, as a kid, I did live in North Vancouver. I didn't live on his land or even in his town, whatever. I never lived in Deep Cove, but it is weird. It is kind of weird, and we shared the same address, not the same street name, but the numbers were the same, and they're magic numbers. So I thought that was kind of fucking cool. I had never heard of him either. Supposedly Crowley told everyone to like bury his work, and but if you read it, it's just a compliment. He's talking about the Aeon of Mott as justice, exactly like how we described it. Exactly like justice, balancing, dancing, flexibility. So I think it's really interesting, and I think that we should actually look at it because I think that the. I mean, I'm not going to take all the credit for it. It was like I think I maybe found a different way to express the same idea, but I also think that it reveals maybe the Aeonic words. I'd like to think so anyway. And so my Aeonic words were obviously different than theirs, but I think that theirs are interesting. And I think that it's worthwhile to, as like a meditation on Kabbalah, even just to read their work because they were obviously tapped into something. I mean, Rom thinks so. Rom thinks I was clearly like, and I was, and I would have, I told people, I told HD, I was like, yo, I see the pink ray like all the time. And he would like be like, yeah, yeah, he's like, yeah, my guru says this really powerful, and I was like, yeah, so did mine, and I'd be like, yeah, and it also is this, and he'd be like, yeah, but you shouldn't really cling to those experiences, and I was like, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't really cling to those experiences, and he's right, I shouldn't really cling to those experiences, but I just find it profound now that I've calmed down with that, and that I'm not like as top whatever, I'm just more myself now, maybe you could say, and then Rom sending me this, and then it's like then we're doing this series on Aetherpunk / Solar Punk, and it's like we're talking about like new aeons. We're saying February 2025. I mean, we said this in December, February 2025. This is going to be like the time of the new aeon. It's going to coincide with this year of the snake, and it makes a lot of sense because the daughter tames the serpent Rahu, and the son tames the serpent Ketu. Like the son tames the will, you could say, by through his own will, through his single pointedness. And then I realized, like, yeah, that's why the Theosophists were so obsessed with this idea of the Kumara and who he is. And if you follow the Tantric, Ram and I sometimes have these meta conversations in the chat, which are like, I'm sure Mookie and obviously Bulbrave Free and Set and Shakti, our Japanese Dakini, I'm sure they all follow it. But if you can't follow it, basically we have this dialogue about like who is the proper son. Like is it the son of Shiva or is it Vishnu cast as the son? Very different. It's very different. It doesn't sound different, if you're not familiar with the Puranic ideas, because Vishnu is often treated as a sun, but he is not the sun. He just really isn't. He's just like, it cannot, it just doesn't exist. It's just not his story. And Kumara is really the name of Skanda, who's also really the name of Subramanya. So I'm just going to get into this before we really get into Aetherpunk, because I actually think this matches perfectly. Subramanya literally means he who is underneath the husk, Brahma being the husk. Modern Hinduism often conflates Brahma as the higher god. No, Brahma is not the higher god. Brahma is the spent husk of creation. Sometimes Brahma is Vishnu, sometimes it is Shiva, and sometimes it is Shakti. Although Ashakta would say it is always Shakti because she is kind of the whole thing, and then God is away from us, like on the carnal ground, meditating, right? So, his son, he has one, and his name is Kumara, which is also the sun. In Buddhism, he gets Vajrafied. So, what is Vajrafied? So, I was even thinking about this, like, how was I going to explain this idea of Vajrification of Puranic deities, or if you want to say more Indo-Aryan deities become Vajrified through exposure to Buddhism. So, what is becoming Vajrified? Well, it can be really, I think, very simply explained. Vajrification is when you increase their position, a deity's position, from cosmological into ontological. It's like the simplest way I thought of to describe, but I don't even know if that's like a complete articulation of what it is. But that's one idea. They rise in consciousness. That's an easier way, maybe, to think of it. They rise in consciousness towards Buddha nature. Okay? So he becomes Vajrafied. We obviously keep his left-hand practices in Buddhism, but they are completely forgotten in Hinduism. Although originally he was completely a left-handed deity, the sun. It's like a Jesus figure, very similar. They actually have a lot of similarities, a great deal of similarities. Even the word scandalon in the New Testament occurs 44 times. That's very interesting. I've always found that very interesting. Why would they compound a Greek and a Sanskrit word? There's a lot of other ways you could have expressed the same idea, unless you are actually referring to the same thing, a turning of the keys, because that's really what a skanda is. It's a way to. That's not quite what it is. It's really an aggregate, but it's also a key. It's also referring to the fact that he holds a bell, because in Buddhism we hold a kila, or the peg, or the knife, and we hold it in reverse to the iconography of Kumara. We hold it downwards, the left-handed position. He holds his bell pointing upwards towards the sky, the right-handed position. Okay? Plus ultra. That's really what it's saying. So, all that being said, he is sort of that Luciferic force. You can even describe him as that. He can be very ferocious because he takes in all the hosts of the Father. Now, what are the hosts of the Father? The hosts of the Father are really just aggregates of your own mind. But if we're using a meta mythology of the Puranas, we will also say, this is also true then, that they are also the hosts of Shiva, of the Father, of the God the Father. So in his paradox, because one is a paradox, in his paradox, he expresses in multiplicity because his mind is enraged, because he is Rudra, howling storm god. But you will say, Jin, how do we see Shiva? And he's light blue, and he's always smiling and meditating, and he looks stoned. And yes, that is God when he is meditating. But in the internality of who he is, in his mind, that is Bhairava, the ferocious one. So the sun is his rectification. So very similar in some ways to the ontological position of Jesus in the New Testament. Now, I'm not saying that Vajrakalaya, in his Vajrafied form, is identical to Jesus. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Kumara and Jesus, no, okay? Not Krishna and Jesus, Kumara and Jesus share a similar ontological or the same ontological position. I'm not saying they're the same character. But you can say, as is a Buddhist critique of both Hinduism and Christianity, that both are tamasic in nature. That doesn't mean anything bad. That just means that it is simply about the temple ritual. So your salvific or soteriological path is much slower. It takes many lifetimes to escape samsara. That's how Buddhists would think of it. It takes many lifetimes because you're not doing theurgy and you're not internalizing the practice. Yes, Frater Darklord, please go ahead.
I just have a question that I don't want to get lost as we get further from it. Yeah. So what you just said is super interesting. So while Shiva is sitting in meditation, why is his sort of like nature of mind or aspect of mind wrathful? Like, what is Shiva encountering that would require the sort of like wrathful, destructive orientation? Because I understand it like as I'm, I've got all kinds of things that need purification, that need to be destroyed, that need to be disaggregated, right? Like, absolutely, that makes complete sense. But I always sort of imagine the sort of fixed, the immovable, sort of like almost like complete at rest Shiva. It's hard to understand what the need would be for that sort of wrathful inner orientation. Could you just like kind of explain a little bit about that? Because I'm not familiar with this stuff at all.
No, I appreciate the question, and this is a great question, of course. Obviously, you always ask the best questions, Matt, as well. And so, no, I appreciate it, and I think it clarifies for people listening. So, in a Buddhist view, you could say, Buddhist angle, he has a dualistic consciousness. He wants to be outside of the world, but he creates the world at the same time. At least the carnal ground and the things that appear before him. He creates those things. Dependent origination, right? So this is his story in the Puranas. This is why I always say, like, you cannot neglect the Puranas. The Puranas are the key. You want the key of, like, how to connect Indo-European mythologies with Dharma, maybe you could say, broadly, maybe not Buddha Dharma, but Dharma more broadly. It is through the Puranas. It is the true, there is a deep tantric layer in the Puranas. And you must know them in order to practice Indian Tantra. You have to know the Puranic stories because you have to understand the context in which things arise. Okay, so that being said, you could also say that when he is sleeping, the true emergent nature of his mind is actually wrathful, is actually Bhairava, is actually Rudra. Because in some ways, okay, so we'll say it at a theological level. So we'll just take it in a theological level right now, okay? So we're saying that God is the, maybe not penultimate, but we're saying he's the prime focus of the metaphor I'm using, okay? So he creates the world in the first turning. He lives out his Leela. Shakti dies. Sati dies. She gets immolated. Her body gets chopped up into 51 pieces and scattered all over the world. That's the idea. But obviously in India, they have 51 temples. Not anymore 51 temples, but they have like at least 18 that are from the original Pitha list. And they say that they encapsulate or are covering a piece of her body. Okay? So the whole idea in the Puranas is that she dies because of various things. Now, different scholars have interpreted why she dies for very different reasons. This is why view is so important. The angle, I know Solar will totally get this, and I'm kind of ripping him off a little, but it's also it's about what Matt is often talking about as well, and it's about what I'm talking about as well, like perception. What angle are you perceiving things from? So anyway, if you want my preferred interpretation, and maybe this is more interesting in a metaphysical way, is that her father who could said to be Daksha. You could say her father was Daksha. Daksha is the goat-headed, well, he's not goat-headed yet, but he becomes the goat-headed king of heaven. Okay? So Brahma, in this case, is actually a husk. So the husk lusts after his own creation, his own daughter, the ultimate of taboos, right? Because Shiva is what? Shiva represents, even though he gives Tantra, he gives the left-hand path to humanity, or at least to his wife, with the express idea that she will transmit it to humanity, which she does in a way. He also is the ultimate of the Shramanic deities, the yoga. He is the Adi Yoga, right? The Adi Yogi. Excuse me, the Adi Yogi. He's the one. He's the one. So he's totally Shramanic in his thing. He's like when he experiences lust with his wife when she's reincarnated as Shakti, they create they create the sun. That's their whole thing. That's the one time they they kind of get it together at that moment, and they create something like totally brand new. And in a way, you could say that that is the beginning, the aeon of the sun. Maybe you could say that that is the beginning of liberation from the cycle. Obviously, we're looking at it more in a Puranic way. We're not saying it's strictly Buddhist, but maybe we're in like an interstitial. Like it's kind of Advaita, it's kind of Buddhist, it's kind of, Tantric. It's all those things at the same time. So basically, she reincarnates and he says, we've already lived out this Leela where I've been married to you. We had a beautiful carnal ground palace, a palace within the cemetery, the smashana, that is earth. And she, and she says, no, you cannot leave me. Time cannot leave because I need time to play the Leela. She needs her, she needs time and space. But in this context, you could say she's also space. So basically, he rectifies himself by saying, I'm leaving my own creation, which is the world, and I'm going to the smashana, Mahasmashana, not just the smashana, but the Mahasmashana. I'm going to meditate. Peace out, dudes. And so the whole story of Ganapati, his son with the elephant head, who is also, that name means Lord of Hosts, he takes over the father's role. Now, he is not the begotten son. He is the created son. He's created through Shiva's quote-unquote juices and Shakti's quote-unquote juices and some quicksilver and some turmeric and some chickpea flour, among other things. But he is not created in the generative way, right? So that's kind of the idea. I know I got way off path with that, but no, I think that's the idea. Is that like he's gone off to the cremation ground to pray. The Shakti then becomes in charge of the Leela. But because Shakti is refractionary, right? She's the light in refraction, like the diamond with the light passing through and it refracts because it's a cut diamond. So Venus refracts onto the Leela, and then that is both the Leela and it's her. But she's sort of in splendor. She's like in the many. And so she's not necessarily in control of every moment in the Leela. This is really about how Ganapati, he's not really in control either. Ganapati's not really in control either, but he is the Lord of the hosts. So if you pray to a host, the idea is it goes to him, the prayer goes directly to him and not God the Father. So obviously there is an Enochian sort of overlay with like Metatron and Enoch and the who is God or who is the Vajradhara or who is kind of like the who's really in charge is a question. But it's always Shakti in a way because she's also the co-emanatrix. So that's the second turning. That's the turning of Tara, where she rectifies herself through Tantra. That's Tara's especially in Tantra, in Indian Tantra, so non-Buddhist Tantra. But of course, Buddhist, hello, Sir Tim, and welcome to our space. We're doing a little tantric introduction, I guess, to this. So welcome, Sir Tim of the Tunnels, our brother from a frater Hawaii. I'll have to look up the not postal code, the area code and think of a funny frater name for you later. Okay. So basically, Shakti's in charge, but she has to undergo purification through Tantra. Now, the Indians did take back to Tara Tantra, specifically Tara Tantra. They went to Tibet by their own stories, by their own accounts. They went to Tibet and reclaimed the Tara practice and brought it to Tara Peeth, which is the Tara Peeth where her third eye fell. So if you understand this temple, if you know anything about it, it's one of the most famous of the Shakta Tantra temples, as well as it contains a living flame beneath the temple. Now, this living flame is often utilized to start corpse fires. So there is a murti that is very ferocious that is there. That just means statue or icon, you could say. But the icon is actually encased in several metallic layers. And the external densities, so just like Kabbalah, external densities do not actually look. Even though the external density is very ferocious, supposedly the internal density is actually the most ferocious. So you could say that this is Tara in her rectification phase. She goes from like the inner to the outer, or the secret to the outer. So in order to reach the higher principle of what? A Dakini. So Tara is not always a Dakini in India, but Tara becomes a Dakini in Buddhism. So you can see she's Vajrafying. She's raising in her consciousness from this low state of consciousness. So basically, she rectifies herself. In doing this, she gives the tantras to Kumara, the son. Kumara has a decision. Does he give the left-hand path to humanity, or does he give the left-hand path? Well, so the idea is, I'm sorry, I went a little ahead of myself. Does he give the left-hand path to humanity, or what does he do with it? What is his will, you could say? Well, Vishnu comes to him and says, look at the state of humanity, like the Asuras often win the wars in heaven, and like all this other stuff happens. So it would be better if you didn't. So basically, that's what happens. He doesn't do it. In some stories, it's actually Brahma. So this is really interesting, again, to the idea of his name being Subramanya, he who is beneath the husk, or he who is under, physically under the husk, meaning that he who is under God. That's often how it's translated. But it's not really God, it's the husk. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about Brahma. I also think it's really important he didn't do it out of necessarily, he didn't discard so he ends up discarding the Tantras. He shoots his Vel into the demon, pierces his heart. It's a huge demon. None of the gods can defeat him. Only this most powerful martial god. He's very Gevuratic, especially at this stage. So he wields the weapon, which is also his mother. It's very interesting. It's like his mother's Shakti. It's her essence. So that's what his Vel is. So he wields it against the Asura. I forgot what the Asura's name is. It could be Tarak Asura, but it might be a different one. I can't remember. I'm sorry, Ram. Or that might be for Sri Bala. I can't remember. Anyways, he kills this demon that's unkillable by any standard. Then, who was trying to steal the Tantras? So the Asura was trying to steal the Tantras. I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place. But anyways, so an Asura tries to steal the Tantras. What are Asuras? Very simply, Ram and I talk about this in the chat. We have a back and forth about this. Asuras are simply the shadow and the sin and the aggregates, if you want to call them that. That's a perfect way to describe it. The klipas, you could say, of the gods. That's really what they are. That's why I'm also so against, worship of the hosts. I just think, the worship of husks is dangerous. And I think that's born out through known history, or at least the history as we know of it. So maybe that's not true. Maybe my Kabbalah is bad. I don't think it is, but I think God is more. Don't worship the husks, at least in my opinion. Okay. So basically, he takes the tantras. So in this case, it's referring to a palm booklet of tantras, but it's also a conceptual idea of the whole tantras. This is why it's so important not to take the text literally, because if you took it literally, the text reads in Sanskrit. It says a palm booklet of tantra. Well, how is he throwing away all tantras then? So basically, he throws away his own left-handed path method because why? He was a left-handed path deity up to this point. However, he decided instead to discard his own method, knowing that it would be eventually recovered. So I think Solar will find this really interesting because it ties right into Dzogchen. Piranhas to Dzogchen in 1 degree, you could say, 1 angle. So what happens? So he casts the Tantra, remember this is all the Tantras, he casts them into the supernal waters, the primordial waters, but they're the ocean above the ocean of samsara. So it's the primordial ocean, really. Swallowed by a giant leviathan. I know, we're being very Kenneth Grant tonight. That's okay. Kenneth Grant's kind of cool. But anyway, so he gets swallowed by a giant leviathan. It sits in his stomach for 800 years. That's how long this aeon lasts, okay? So he switches from a left-handed deity, a Tamil deity, a Dravidian deity, shout out Ram, shout out Frater Singapura. He changes from a left-handed deity into a completely right-handed deity. Well, this also parallels Jesus in a way. In a way. I'm not saying Christ was ever a left-handed deity. I'm just saying he's only worshipped really as a right-handed deity. So it makes sense. Like you move the sun into the position of what? Into the position of rectification at Hesed. Interesting. And you can even see there's an iconographic shift through the Rosicrucian era and through the Tamil iconography itself from depictions of red and war into a more synthesis kind of color orientation, a more Tipheratic orientation. And you can see Jesus moving from red into blue until eventually you get, of course, my favorite icon, which because it's just the most Kabbalistically easy to describe, which is Christ of the Sacred Heart. So in India, which has had, especially southern India, so this is really important to note, southern India had Thomasine Christians since the 2nd century AD. There are also a very famous diaspora Jew population in southern India called the Cochin Jews that had also been there since that same time. So when people are haters and doubters, we'll call them doubters, at least doubters, but often haters, they will say the systems aren't aligned. But there were clearly people who did know multiple systems. So you kind of see this. Anyways, back to the point. So you see that there is a syncretism for a long time between these two characters, between Christ, which is obviously a C, and Kumara, which is obviously a K. It's also interesting. And so in South India at churches, you will often see, and I've posted them many, many times, is pictures of Christ holding a bell in his right hand. Interesting. So basically, it was his aeon. We were supposed to sort of rectify ourselves through the right hand practices, bring us through that kind of, that pure process of purification, that kind of Tipheratic synthesis that should happen. But it was incomplete. And so, why was it incomplete? Because really, in a secret way, Kumara is not a bachelor. And maybe that's why I'm so drawn to this idea of Mary Magdalene and Christ. I'm not saying they're sexual or yab yum or anything. I'm just saying that there's something interesting about this in Tantra. Is that the idea of the son being married, well, he's married to two very important sort of ideas, we'll say. Is one is a queen of heaven. So she is literally a princess of heaven. A princess of heaven, okay? And his other wife is a Chandali princess, an outcast princess, a princess of Tantra. Very interesting. So his wife would represent the Orthodox, the Queen of Heaven, Princess of Heaven, excuse me, Princess, not Queen, Princess of Heaven. She would represent the Orthodox method, the Orthodox transmission, because she's also said to be the daughter of Saraswati and Brahma together. So a husk and his Shakti, Vedic knowledge, Vedic learning, that's her parents. That's one story. Obviously, this got sort of dispersed and different regional. There are different regional versions of the same story, okay? But I'm just telling the most general one. And the one I think is the most Kabbalistically interesting. His other wife is a earthly princess, earthly, and she is a Chandali. That means she practices the tribal religion, the Matrika religion, the religion of the 7 or 8, sometimes the Ashtamatrika, sometimes it's the Saptamatrika. We've discussed this before many times. The 7 or the 8 of the ferocious goddess, of which Chamunda is the primary force. So, interesting. So, anyways, she would represent the tantric model, but he becomes a what? He becomes a bachelor. He rectifies his tantric past through shamanic exercises, which you could say is also a way to get him closer to the father. It's kind of interesting. Maybe he's looking for his father because, his father already left. His father was like, kind of like, like all the jokes that you see on Twitter about like fatherless households, like that was Shiva. Like he left. He like he left. So he told his wife to give the tantras to his son, so the son would do what thou will with them. But he really intended for the son to give them to us. But he made a different choice. So that's basically that. And then, so to tie this back, I promise, I'm sorry, Solar, I'm going to tie it to Larchin right now. So they're floating around. So there's this very amazing tantric sage. So he's a Shakta Tantra, but he's also, in Buddhism, considered to be a Mahasiddha and an Arhat, both. And so his name is Matsyendranath. He is depicted as riding a giant fish, a giant leviathan, you could say. And he's like a typical yogi, a typical Mahasiddha. He just wears his loincloth and he has his bun and like with a bone in it, like very chud. And so he gets swallowed by this giant leviathan. Welcome, Shakti, our Japanese zucchini. You obviously got invoked at the very beginning, along with Bulbrave Free and Mookie. So thank you so much. Welcome, of course, and blessing that you are here. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so Matsyendranath. Matsyendranath. Okay, well, we'll get into that after. But Matsyendranath gets swallowed. He's a Mahasiddha. So he gets swallowed by this giant Leviathan, and he sits in the stomach of this Leviathan, and what does he find? Well, he finds the book, or all the Tantras. So he spends another 800 years in deep study within the belly of the beast, you could say, very realistic, very literally, and he learns Tantra. So when he completes his sadhana, remember he doesn't exist on the garden or the external carnal ground. The carnal ground that he is on is a literal wasteland of digestion. So interesting idea, and also speaks to something that John brought up earlier in the chat. Anyways, but so he flies out on a cloud. So his practice that he then gave to the world was what practice, Jane? Vajra Sattva. Really fucking interesting. Yesod sits on a moon disk. Path of rectification. Just saying. Really fucking interesting. So he gives Vajrasattva to humanity. So that's why Buddhists credit him with being the originator of this. But you could also say that he is Vajrasattva himself. You could also say he's Padmasambhava. That's a more enigma way to understand Vajrasattva. But yeah, you can do that visualization too and service on this. So it's the prime teaching. So what did he make of the left-hand path? He made it in synthesis. He made it into a path of rectification. He did not make it into a path of transgression. Interestingly, there were only 2 of the Nath yogis, so the Nath means 9, so there were 9 yogis. Interesting, 9 angles, 9 yogis. So of the 9 yogis who invented Hatha yoga, so positionality yoga, like physical position yoga, only 2 of them were tantrics. So Matsyendranath, as I said, venerated by both Shakta Tantras as well as Buddhist Tantras, Vajrayana. But you have another one who is a Shakta Tantra. So this is where you have, right in this interstitial weird period of like Matsyendranath, I don't know, floating up to heaven, clear light body, rainbow body, whatever happens. And his students, And then what happens? Hello, welcome Zach. Zach Schumar, co-host to my show, obviously, but on his own series that he did, Tracy Twyman, 5 parts. Thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate you. Amazing to see you here. And Zach is also now a content creator, and he is doing really fun and cool and self-soundtracked YouTube. So, check those out if you're interested. Yes, Solar, Frater Dark Lord, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to like sort of put a general thematic question kind of on the back burner, right? Like I don't want to interrupt the sort of like tantric flow that we have going on here, but while we have Dark Soul in here, who's some guy I just met, we were talking about black metal. We're not talking, but there was some good engagement, some good hate on the timeline that I love to see. I have I had a question about solar punk, right? Because I'm an old head. I'm a soy millennial, and I don't know about this newfangled solar punk stuff. And I was kind of looking at it a couple weeks ago to sort of refresh my aesthetic memory in prep for the space that I ended up not really participating in last week. And it struck me that um, solar punk it reminds me of these kinds of visions of like Volkish futurism, but with all of the how do I say this? With the sort of like scarcity and conflict stripped out of it, right? So it's this kind of like utopian vision of a future in a situation where you don't really have like competing interests or conflicts of will or any of the sort of attendant sort of fascist implications of a kind of like Volkish like futurist vision. And I was kind of wondering, like, how we're treating solar punk or how we're sort of defining it within the context of these spaces. Just because I wanted to have the right sort of interpretive frame, I don't know, to kind of think about some of these things, maybe like parapolitically and stuff. Now, again, this isn't like a right now question. This is just kind of like framing these spaces question.
Absolutely. This is a great question. I think that we kind of tackled it a little last week, just in the sense that we outlined the aesthetics of what that will be, but or what it is. And I think that we also differentiated, like, it's not purely solar punk because obviously we're a metamagical group. So we obviously made it into Aether Punk, which is kind of like the fusion of magic and technology. So there is a component of will, at least in Aether Punk. But you're right. I've never heard solar punk described quite like that, but I liked it. And I think that one thing you may appreciate about it, Solar, is that it does had, or at least had, I would say, post communist or post anarchist leanings out of Bookchin. So when he was starting to more embrace like this libertarian sort of like decentralized models of like maybe disconnected city states, but it connected through a kind of ecological awareness as well as perhaps a pragmatic technological desire or will. That's a better way. Will. Pragmatic technological will. And so like the will to like they want to build things, they want to do things, they want to stay stagnant in the past. I would definitely say that it has those implications. So yeah, I agree. It is kind of yeah, there's a post scarcity element for sure. And welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, brother Frater Dark Lord, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the most interesting things that I encounter in this sort of like solar punk I don't know genre is that there's sort of an invisible like hidden authoritarian context that must be present to sort of guarantee to anchor, but I prefer the framing of like to guarantee the non-competitive framing of everyone's activities, right? Because we haven't gone like full return traditionalism. We haven't like nuked technology, right? This isn't a Unabomber future, right? So people are still like doing interesting things, cooperating with each other, presumably engaging in technological development, striving. But somehow this never generates any conflict in this kind of like speculative world, right? And just in practical terms, unless we've sort of like re-engineered humanity and radically transformed the way we engage with one another, which I suppose is maybe part of the premise, I guess. But I'm not really interested in that. I think it's more interesting to consider that there's sort of an invisible authoritarianism behind like the sort of like images that we see that are sort of like keeping everyone in line, right? That sort of like allow this vision to unfold. Uh, I don't know. To me again, and I'm sort of referencing Rom here because there's something very like Singaporean about that, right? Like the hammer of God, right? Like the cosmic Vajra is just out of frame, right? And that's what allows everyone to like fly on the hoverboards and like sun their balls or whatever. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, okay, I'll address that. That was great. That was honestly really great, legit. So it's non-Singaporean because why? It's more Volkish. I'm gonna get in so much shit for using this word. Solar, you're getting me in trouble. Okay, it is more Volkish because the confines are perhaps maybe at one level they're ideological, maybe at another level they're cosmological, and maybe they're ontological. So maybe it's everyone's kind of dharma pilled. Maybe you could say that. Maybe that's the true aetherpunk is that we're all dharma pilled, and so we kind of have a directionality, which is obviously non-directionality or omnidirectional. Interesting. Uh, right? Because that's kind of an idea. That's one idea, at least for rainbow body. So is the omnidirectionality of the infinite light. You could say that. So maybe that is what it is. It's like we're all like we're leveling up. We're like doing better. Like we're magic punking. We're like we're exactly what we do. We're talking about left-handed path things. We talk about different things, not just in the spaces, but just in general. I think it's like part of our worldview now. And like you hear me talk about Tantra, I hear you talk about Runa. It's We're in a generative kind of moment, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not so futurist. Maybe it's about right now. Maybe it's about like maybe not right now, but maybe the moments that we are like in synthesis together. And then it's like generative for maybe seeds for people in the near future. Maybe that's what's speculative about it. I don't know, but I think that it's also like we're kind of like, isn't it better? Isn't it pragmatic? Like I know this is something Dr. Flower said to you, like in response to one of your questions about, and he was very like, there's a pragmatic element that needs to be measured or whatever. I forgot how he phrased it, but it's something about pragmatism, how useful it is, and I think maybe we are all turning to pragmatism. And like we're gonna say like what's useful, like is it useful for us to, okay, I'll just use a modern political example. Is it useful for us to outsource like this kind of knowledge, this kind of technology, this kind of building, or is it more useful for us to work together, who are at least have the connection of land and perhaps ideological, sometimes cosmological, sometimes ontological kinship, and like let's figure out a way to work together and build it for ourselves. Something also very American about that. So that's what I kind of think that Aether Punk is, rather than Solar Punk, which I agree. There's a Singaporean element to that because it's like, oh, we will send the national service kids. They're not really kids, but because they're like in the military, so it's like it is real army. So we'll send them and they'll do it on the week. They'll do it and they'll say, um, we'll put the panels above the street lights or whatever. Yeah, and everyone's just gonna be like, yeah, this is like the way we're gonna, laksa, just eat laksa, makan. I know all the lingo too, so it's okay. Rom knows. Um, but yeah, basically that's it. Like, yeah, I mean, that would be very. I think you're right in the way you're thinking. But I think Aetherpunk's different because I think that there is more of a libertine, or if not libertine, maybe that's become an undesirable word. Maybe you could just say Luciferic spirit, or a liberatory spirit, but not in like the leftoid way. Liberatory in that, like, yes, we actually can do this for ourselves and we can think for ourselves. And I think it's also about like what I was saying at the very beginning, like about how I credit you very strongly with teaching me about the importance of being able to have flexible ideological frameworks for different situations. Maybe that's what pragmatism really is. Okay, yes, Matt, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. I'm sorry that we both spoke. I mean, I've spoken a lot, too much.
No, I think it's very nice to hear about the tantric and other stuff. I just want to chip in the solar punk versus ether punk, or at least the way I understand it. I'll say solar punk, from my point of view, it's more like, as the name suggests, nature kind of something like ecological working, like some very the star, the tarot card, the star. So something like working in harmony with the ecology of the planet or whatever the environment you're in, and doing like clean stuff and so on. And that also gets in the way of how they would think about like the social part of it, like kind of this less let's not focus so much on like selling things and whatever, more so in being community. And Aetherpunk being more towards the spiritual, again, as the name suggests, right? The ether. So the Aetherpunk being more in the spiritual side, the magical side, which then doesn't necessarily talk about how in harmony you should be. Like, sure, it would be in harmony, but you have some Aetherpunk examples which there is like still war or whatever, right? There's still like conflicts, which again doesn't mean that all conflicts are bad. Just like we talked about briefly in the beginning, right? Sometimes from conflict something arises, like a synthesis arrives. We have both Hesed and Gevura, right? Just doesn't have to. This conflict or severity shouldn't become like aggressiveness or violence. That's necessarily not the best, but having some of a like a banter, like if you have a younger brother or a older brother, doesn't matter, then you would just switch the roles. But it would be that like banter between boys, like it's available, right? But I'll say in short, that's I'd say the main difference, at least from my point of view, right? So some more ecological focused, and another one more magical, and I should say like technological focused.
Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is like most interesting about solar punk is it's sort of like, I don't know, pairing the sort of like eco optimism, right? Of the, like, I think bringing in Bookchin is really like on the money on that. And just kind of in general, again, sort of like this, like a Volkish vision of the future with, I think, like, it's a vision that can also accommodate a step down or two in simplicity, right? In relative level of social complexity, including technological complexity, right? Of course, there's still like obviously like plenty of technology, like in all the sort of solar punk art and things like that. But there's something about the world that's inherently smaller, right, at this point. And for me, one of the in contrasting these sort of two, solar versus aetherpunk, um, one is still a much more interconnected world, right? Like the world of the aetherpunk is one in which, like, sure, there, you might have like, physical borders or something like that, but there's still an internet. There's still, or again, even some sort of like magical, like hyperspace variant of interconnectedness among peoples, right? Where I don't know, there's something again, coming back to that sort of like Volkish, constrained, simpler element of the solar punk. So I think this is legitimately really interesting because it probably won't. It's not going to all happen in our lifetimes, as young as most of us are. But like Zog is dying, right? Like the structures that have dominated the world for the past 100 years are in a death spiral, right? And they will die significantly even over the course of our lifetimes, right? And so you're going to see sort of like social, ethnic, technological experiments. The one that comes to mind that pairs best with solar punk aesthetically is Orania. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with this. It's basically an Afrikaners exclusive, so not just white South African, but specifically Afrikaners, intentional community, kind of out in the sticks in South Africa. That is essentially in its like, it's in its early decades, right? But the idea is they're sort of like building for a post-national as well as post-collapse vision of South Africa, right? And what's interesting is, and there are other sort of social experiments, communities like this, all across the Western world, of course. But what's interesting about this is right now, and Orania is a good example because even it's one of the more developed in terms of its own culture, because it's very sort of, it knows what it wants to be. It has a very like clear sense of propagating Afrikaner language and culture, etc. But even then, it's very much defined against what is outside, right? So it's a very negative, external gazing kind of culture and orientation, right? It's on the defense, right? It's the citadel, bastion of this culture. But over time, like that and again, not that it won't need to sort of hold its ground, right? But like things develop their own positive, like affirmative cultures, right? At some point, you can't just be like, we're safe in here, we're not them outside. And that's where I think these kind of like speculative artistic genres, sort of absurd as they may be, can start to come in. It's like, well, hey, if we're actually building our own thing, if we've actually achieved a meaningful degree of independence from like these, sort of hegemonic economic and political systems, right? Ideological systems. If we're actually free in here, and what we build here in the ruins in the dark, what we build could be anything. To quote my favorite Polaniuk line or two, right? Um, it it's these things can be useful, sort of examples, right? Like I think it's good to be able to dream in aesthetics a little bit, right? Instead of just like, I don't know, mindlessly reproducing what is outside but based or but white or but volkish or whatever, because that's super lame. I don't know. I've gone on for too long, but
Well, that's kind of the idea. That's the whole. You just described Welcome to Hyperborea in like some very profound but not very long words. That's pretty much it. It's like that's what we're talking about. Like it's speculative, so it generates the ideas for people to carry forward. Not necessarily that we will experience it, but yeah, I think you know this, and like also that is kind of what America is. Like whether that is the America of 1777 or it's like the America of like whatever time, like right now or 2050, there will be this is inevitable. There is inevitability that we will have to like reimagine the world, not necessarily us, but people will. And why not contribute to the canon a little bit? Like, why not be free? At least for us, right now. Yeah, let's be cognitively free to like dream of these aesthetic genres that as ridiculous as they may be. And I totally agree. And I think the interesting thing is we talked about this last week is like Aetherpunk is not dystopian like cyberpunk, but it is also not utopian necessarily like solarpunk. It is kind of neither nor. It's the most neither nor of them all. I don't know. That's how I kind of think of it. It's like a little bit of both. It's kind of like punk where you're like fuck the archons, but it's also a little bit like, yeah, we're gonna build it. Like we're the builders, we're the makers, we're gonna fucking do it. I like that. I just think that that's very now. I think it's like it sets a tone of like there's so much passivity. Like what do they call it? The like red pill guys they call it, like sigma behavior. That's how I see like the whole timeline. It's like very like, oh, woe is us. Like all this thing. Like yeah, there's so much outside of us. Like we all know from Kabbalah class, from all the spaces we've done. There's so much we cannot control outside of our own sphere of influence. But maybe there is like a connection that we all kind of share, and we do because we all like when people come, as I always say, we transcend time and enter into a space, a co-magical space, a consensual magical space together. That's what this is. So absolutely all of those things, and it's generative and what in whatever small way it is. Of course, doing it live, doing it on an app called X, doing it on the internet, doing it on Wi-Fi if you're using Wi-Fi, that is Metamagic. Like that is sending it into the Aether wave. So like we're putting our will forth, at least our will in a small portion. Yes, Solar, please go ahead. Save me.
no, man. I'm sorry. I'm enjoying this. So I think one of the reasons, I keep coming back to, I seem to have this like autistic hang up or slash pet project of wanting to sort of unfuck a lot of like basic bitch or more accessible left hand path stuff. And again, it's not that I'm personally in some like grand position to do that. I'm not some like fucking ascended master or whatever, but I sort of like want to see this done. And one of the reasons that I'm interested in this is specifically because I like the aesthetics and I like the vision. So like when I, for example, I mean, not just that I'm a metal guy, like I really like black metal as well as, other things. Um, I'm wearing a band shirt right now, et cetera. And I, got some weird, anyway, there's, how do I say this? When I first heard about the Order of the Trapezoid, and it's like, all right, we're we're gonna combine like the imagery of Nazi Germany and the SS. We're gonna, the Velasberg working, and we're gonna throw this into like, with combine this with HP Lovecraft, and we're gonna put Tesla coils in here. I don't know why, but what's cool? Tesla coils, and like swastikas. That, yeah, you know what? You're doing something. Like you're cooking up something that could potentially be cool and sort of emotionally effective, psychologically effective for magical work. I'm not saying like the Order of the Trap is like the greatest thing ever and that anyone else has to give a shit. But my point is, combined with, like my decades or whatever in like extreme like metal, noise music, power electronics, black metal, like for me, that was an easy sell. Um and so because of that, because there's already these sort of like potent aesthetic expressions of these cultural currents, I want to see non-retarded magical ideas incorporated into that same kind of cultural nexus. Does that make sense? Right? Like it's a real deficiency to have sort of like boneheaded ontology, boneheaded sort of magical theory, a lot of bad ideas, a lot of shitty accretions that have sort of gathered and are just like littering the landscape, mixed in with these sort of aesthetic expressions that I think are very cool and can be very like affective, if that makes sense. So that's it's not that I have some like hard on for like Asenath Mason or whatever, right? It's there's like a lot, there's the seeds of some really cool stuff there. I don't know.
No, I agree. Obviously, I'm a goth kid for life. People have tried. People have tried solar so hard. They buy me things that have like any other color but black and gray, and I just won't wear. I just don't. They just sit in my closet. I'm just that it. I was born that way, you could say. So I totally get it. That's what I like about tantra. As I said, we talked about this a little yesterday. I'm in the carnal ground all the time. I don't need anyone else to lead me through. I don't watch horror movies, not because I'm scared, but because I've already I already live there conceptually. I don't need to additionally bring on someone else's like psychic damage. So that's where it is for me. That's like I'm already there. So I 100% both agree and empathize with what you're saying about aesthetics. Aesthetics, as we know, very potent magical frameworks can be built from aesthetics, and aesthetics can also carry forth both very non-dual. They can carry forth through time and space the seeds of meaning into the future. So I think aesthetics are really important, obviously, and like I that's what I like about aether punk rather than solar punk. Solar punk to me has like a very like yuppie North Face element, like like very like enviro bro. Um, for me, I definitely think aether punk has like a goth wave, or like like a little bit, like it's a little more like I was like a little like skate punk in like the early 2000s. Okay, like let's just be real. So the reality is like that's what I always think of when I think of aesthetics. Like that's the kind of like things I think of, like street art, board art, like what the cool kids were wearing on Queen Street West, like obviously very Toronto, or like in Mongkok, like we had all the you had like Mongkok Karens, like in the Yakuza, like outfits were really cool at one point in the early 2000s in Asia, not just for Japanese. Obviously, this is obviously China Chinese triad gangster riff on that idea. And if you ever met anyone in my family, you would understand why I like that aesthetic. So, so I think I reference things that I'm familiar with. So I again I totally agree with you. I like the idea of rectification. I think is to bring the things into awareness, like to say like these are conceptual ideas, like breaking free of the specific chains, and like understanding that religion is not contained also in the institution. And also solar, I will just say like all my thinking is aeonic thinking, like in the sense that like I always can say this is like why I say this for Aeon of the Daughter. This is why I say this, or why I justify this with this idea in Aeon of the Daughter. Like it always comes back to that kind of Aeonic idea for me. I'm just saying for me. It doesn't have to be for any of you, but I kind of think the Aeon of the Daughter and Aetherpunk make the most sense together because it is a rebellious spirit, but it's also brought together in love and synthesis and sort of can do, like true American libertarian, but not in the whatever way that like not in the not in the way that libertarians are majority retards. So by far, but like in a more maybe Rousseau way. Maybe that's a good resolution to your initial question, Solar. Like, is there a Volkish thing? Yeah, maybe there is like a social contract that is renewed. That's very Mithraic, right? I don't know. Kind of interesting. Please go ahead, Solar.
Yeah, no. I think one of the important things, right, in like and again, like the original Volkish movement wasn't really tied to a political program. I don't want to like try to revisionist like dissociate it from like the sort of like development of National Socialist like ideals, aesthetics, all that stuff. Like I've got no problem with that stuff, obviously. So I'm not trying to like obfuscate that, but like Volkish movement in the late 19th and early 20th century predates that by a huge margin. Anyway, but the point is that like no one is going to be embarking on any political projects that are totalizing in the way that like early mid 20th century political ideologies and projects needed to be, right? Like fascism, bolshevism, and then like state socialism in FDR's America. Like those are things that are, again, you're talking about either continent spanning projects or what tried to be continent spanning projects that were mobilizing all sections of the economy for total war, right? Like press ganging, like massive, like tens of millions of people either into an army of labor, like literally, or into like battlefield roles for combat operations, right? Um, we don't live in anything like that, right? We live in a deindustrializing world of fragmentation. We live in a sort of ideologically sort of fractally fracturing world at this point, right? Like the pink ray of discoherence is in full effect. Like, so none of those conditions that so when I say like Volkish futurism, I just want to be really clear. It's not. I'm not trying to like. I'm not trying to like PC that stuff. It's simply that like none of those conditions apply. Like the sort of like political experiments, the social experiments, and the aesthetic experiments that we're going to have an opportunity to deploy over the next like 50, 100, and 200 years are not of the same like scope, scale, and ambition that those early mid 20th century sort of things we're shooting for. Like there's no need, there's no context, that's not going to happen. It's going to be like much smaller scale stuff. So given that it's not going to be totalizing, there is going to be an inherent element of punk and remix and just like that sort of like looseness and fluidity of experimentation, just because we're not deploying like these monolithic sort of mass things. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
That is extremely aeonic. Like, it's not a fixed aeon, right? It's like always in synthesis, always in disaggregation, always in rectification at the same time. So that's exactly how I envision, like I would say, is Aetherpunk. It is, and Matt was totally right. Like a lot of the series that we brought up, they do envision war. They do envision conflict. It's just different kinds of conflict, and maybe, as I always say, like the best kind of conflict is really in your mind. Really, like that process of Gevra and Hesed should really be in your mind. The elevated consciousness, of course, and you're rectifying it in your like primordial, pristine Rigpa. But like your single pointed mind, the sun mind, to bring it back to that. I know I went on a long tantric kind of meandering, but it does come back to this that he is the will. So it's an aeon of love and will together. So what is that? It's like love for the world, love for each other. I'm not saying in like a libtard kumbaya circle way, but I think that a lot of us are okay with that too. I think that a lot of millennials and like Zoomer kids, there's something okay about that. There's something that we can just be like, yeah, we can put aside some differences. Maybe not everything. I'm not saying everything is, there's like nothing without distinction. But I'm saying a lot of us can, like even for me, even my most wingnut moments, I could be like, yeah, I could work with someone, like in real life, like I could do something with someone just because we don't agree on something. That's fine for me. I think a lot of people are like that. I think a lot of people are a lot more flexible, and I think a lot of people like logic. I think a lot of people can be persuaded to not just political things, but just like to like reality, like worldviews. Like you can persuade someone to change their worldview just simply based on genuine interaction. I really believe that the power of the word. So that comes back to like the will and the sun. Like, what is the sun if not the word? And what is the will but like the sort of prayoga, the power you put behind it? So where does that happen? That first happens in your mind, that primordial white Garuda, stainless sun consciousness. That first Om, the first sound of the Father, that's what it is. So then you put it into gross speech, but it has to go through two other secret processes first, right? Yes, Solar, go ahead.
Yeah, so you've taken this back in the direction that I think most people in this space want to hear it. Sort of like, again, taking this back, sort of like within within the mind, right, within the individual. I'm out here talking about big historical processes, much larger kind of like social things. So let's maybe go somewhere in the middle. So one of the things that's striking is the sort of complete collapse of uh, initiatic orders and initiatic systems within the context of like Western occultism in the sort of like latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st century, right? Like the late 19th and early 20th century was this like heyday, this kind of explosion, a little bit of a renaissance, right? You already brought up the OTO, right, earlier in the space. You already brought up the Golden Dawn in the space. But like those things are seen, I mean, so a lot of them are still around, sort of nominally, right? But not really, right? Like probably the best and most promising activities are not happening within sort of Western initiatic orders. And it strikes me, frankly, that there's a lot more coherence in an Eastern context, even in Western lands, right? Like as far as initiatic magic goes, you're much but you're going to have a much better time just trying to find a Vajrayana Lama to learn from, right, than you are to actually plug into a magical Western order that's doing anything interesting or really has much of anything to teach you. And I'm just kind of wondering if you think if what is the future of the initiatic brotherhood in the Aeon of the Daughter as we move into this sort of time of decoherence and synthesis? Do you think?
I think it's you, Frauder Dark Lord. I think that's a great observation, but I think it's you. I think it's like maybe even me a little bit. Maybe it's like Matt. Maybe it's like Rom. Maybe it's like John. Maybe it's like Mookie. Maybe it's like Rollberry Free. Maybe it's Joseph. Maybe it's Shakti. Maybe it's Mike. Maybe it's Mansion Roller. Maybe it's like Zach. Maybe it's like all of us like carrying that little aeonic spark of splendor, you could say, within you, and you express that in your own way, and it's like totally your own thing. Has nothing to do with me, but it's just like something you take with you into the world, and that's maybe the how to reconcile like everything that we're saying and that I'm saying. I have a specific answer, but it's hard for me to articulate, I think, in a way. Give me a moment. Okay, Matt, take over for a second and let me kind of formulate and synthesize of how I believe that will be.
Sure, I can speak about something which I was thinking about while Solar was saying that like some ideas of the past literally cannot work nowadays just because of the way society shifted. So like just very simply, right, if you try to do some psyops nowadays, we have internet, we have X, we can just see stuff and the psyop doesn't work, like, or it works much less efficiently. So if let's say people wanted to try and do something to move hundreds of thousands of people to do something specifically, it will be much harder, not only because you can see, oh, it's bullshit like what they're sending us, but also because a lot of people are more worried about their own things, right? So we are going towards something much more individual, and I see that's very correlated to the current Aeon as well. Like if we take it the astrological way, right? Like Aquarius, again, very individual, very freedom. I want to do my own thing. I want to be different. Like if everyone is being ruled, let's say, is being affected in a way by Aquarius, then and Aquarius would be that person which doesn't want to be like similar to other people, right? They want to do their own thing. So if everybody wants to do their own thing, then it's fucked in a way. You don't have necessarily the collectiveness, because, well, I want to do my own thing, and also because it's air, it's already happening, right? It's going to be very nomadic, so very nomadic lifestyle. That's why I also don't see solar punk being that big, because it kind of requires this like community aspect, like people being together in the same place and so on. But as you can see nowadays, it's like quite the opposite. People just want to go and move and not be here and be there and so on, and like go changing around. But there's also I'll say another bonus point for some kind of Aetherpunk reality, because again, Aquarius and Renus, right, the planet, so makes it very transcendental. Like to my eyes, it's very like Chokhmah, right? So you want to do this like big things and like connect to something greater and whatever. Again, something very Aquarius. So it's kind of it speaks a little bit to how big the things people will want to create, right? So it's not gonna be something just, yeah, let's simple, let me do my own farm thing here. Is like, I don't see this happening. Also because the shadow of Aquarius, or like the opposite, is Leo. So like the energy will be lingering as well. In Leo, it's when you want to do like the big things, right? You want to be that person who's doing the big things and who's shining and who's being seen and so on. This is going to be kind of the shadow of the Aeon. So it's kind of everything, at least from my point of view, pointing towards this kind of, again, very Aetherpunk pilled reality.
That was amazing. Thank you, Matt. And yes, okay, so solar. I agree with everything Matt said, so seconded 100%. So I like how I answered it actually, as like you all take like aeonic ideas and then, in a maybe just a small way, subconscious, that you express it. That I think that's a great initiatic tool. I think that I say that all these spaces are dharmic, so everyone kind of carries the idea of dharma with them and what that is through time and space. Obviously, it's through my own lens or your own lens or whomever, or Matt's own lens or whomever is speaking. So I think that's also a big like way to sort of reconcile maybe that synthesis and that freedom. So that is sort of what that plays off of what Matt was saying. It's like what links us. What links us is maybe the aeonic ideas or ideals. Maybe that is what it is. It's like, and I think we're also a little more psychic. I think not that we are more psychic than the past, but I think that we acknowledge it a lot more. I think people with like good discrimination, good awareness, good discernment actually can say that. Like, I'm a little like there's a little something that happens. Now, does that mean that it phenomenologically matters? No, of course not. I'm like that. But I think in the broader sense, I think we connect because we want to. So that's our community. That's our like Volkskin or whatever. I don't know. And that's what it is. And it's like but yeah, of course, like exactly like what Matt said. Like you can think of it as like two icons. You can think of it as like Vajrayogini and Naram Simha, the lion-headed avatar of Vishnu. But this is not, in fact, the avatar, the aeon of the avatar of Vishnu, or the aeon of the Vajrayogini, of the Diamond Thunder Mother. It's the aeon of the daughter. So what happens on the lowest world is actually the most important to us. It's interesting also what you were saying. Nema said in her Metamagic book that the Aeon of the daughter, she also called it that, or the Aeon of Ma'at, was Ipsos, which arises from Hod. So it refers to like our interconnectivity with each other. She, as well as I, also think of it as more of a psychic Aeon. Obviously, that's not my Aeonic word. So I don't know, but it is an interesting. Obviously, I said Path 22 kind of reconciles the two divisions, but I think, and it does, but I think that there is an element of what she said as well as true. So I think it's like a idea of dharma. I think we're all ready for it. I think we were all ready for the idea of rebirth, at least maybe reincarnation. But that's a little, obviously I'm Buddhist, so that's too eternalist for me. But rebirth is like a great way I like to use. And so I think that, I think everybody's like ideas will change, and that exposure to dharma in terms of initiatic brotherhood, I honestly think that we will return to more of like an open, like we're talking about occult things right now. We talk about Kabbalah like quite intermediate to quite advanced, according to some. I'm not saying that we are, but I'm saying to some people think that we are very advanced. So, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's these like open forums of like people discussing ideas and saying, this is how I envision the tree. Because the Aeon of the Daughter is also about re-envisioning the tree as it works for us, which is an idea that Frater, a Chad, also had. Was like you rebuild the tree for the new Aeon. There's nothing more that brings us into that sixth consciousness, that Tiferatic, like sort of elevated Christ-like consciousness. Like, you're not stuck at Tiphereth. You're not the lion-headed dragon. You're moving. You're the path of light moving upwards to Kether or to death, but whatever. So you're moving upwards, but it's like that synthetic moment. So that's, yeah, I think that's kind of, I don't know. That's sort of what I think is. Okay, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no. Just building on that too. I think another kind of like again, just really kind of iterative here. One of the sort of obvious consequences of the degree of interconnectivity that we have, and the sort of like permeability of little cliques and group chats and forums and all of these things, is that ideas just almost instantaneously sort of transport themselves sort of between one system and another. You have people just like uh, essentially acting as like vectors for interpenetration for between concepts, between, for instance, like different versions of a tree, different systems, right? Like I'm just thinking like how many sort of I don't know, like access points I have just as like one individual. And even if I'm not intentionally doing this, I'm inherently engaging in sort of like, a constant synthesis, right? And essentially like cross-pollinating like all these different things from all these different communities, many of which, at least historically, even just like a decade or two ago, right, would have been more or less completely isolated from all the others. But now, however many members, make them up, those people all have like all these different sort of points of contact with sort of like other ideas, other systems, etc. And I guess where this is going is sort of make the obvious point of this also sort of gestures at the inherent emptiness like of these systems, right? I think it's easier to um, sort of move within and through, for instance, different versions of the tree, but it could literally be any systematization that you want to insert without reifying them. Like I feel like it's nearly impossible to sort of reify systems nowadays, or sort of like modes of analysis, just because it's impossible to sort of fixate on one, to think exclusively in terms of one, without inevitably bringing in basically the kitchen sink. I don't know. It's a good time for that, I guess.
Well, that's why she dances in the heatless fire, right? She's taking all the aggregates of that, like all the aggregates of synthesis, all the excess heat. She's taking all that. And so that's also love. So that's will and love, right? That's the dialectical synthesis. So that also has to happen. That kind of, relationship between the two. So I think that's why it's really important, like, to go back to your question about initiatic practices, is that I think everyone should be doing sadhana every single day. That can be as easy as japas, like you're doing mantra recitations. I think that you can do Vajrasattva, should be doing Nigandro. I think everyone should do Nigandro. If you ask me what I think, that's what I think. I think we should all adopt Thurgic practices every single day. Every single day. Maybe many times a day, if you can. And not in like a Muslim way, obviously. But yeah, I think you should be doing Thurgic practices. That's what I mean. We've talked about this before. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. I really think that that's where to like to be in synthesis. To be in true synthesis is like have a rigorous practice, so very Geberatic. Like you're being like, this is my thing. I'm gonna do it, and you do it. But then also like you're like, yeah, like you're saying, like you're also like in Hesed, you're like a little more flexible. You're like, okay, I'm gonna like take a little bit of this because this is like good. This is like keeping, like there's a lot of stuff. Like a lot of lamas are like this. They're like, yeah, this is interesting. This is interesting. This is interesting. They can understand. They know the systems are quote unquote a Buddhist empty, but empty doesn't mean nothing. As I always say, empty is massless and luminousness. It is the best container, but it's a container that's not a container. It is the best container for, if you want to say, clear light or the word, the bija, the seed. But maybe the seed isn't even anything. Maybe the seed is also in and of itself empty, which it is also, of course, in Buddhism. So it's like just love and emptiness, and that's it. That's the, it's like rigorous practices. It's practices of rectification, but it's also practices of higher knowledge. So it's both of those things at the same time brought together in love. That's also the rectification of left and right hand path. You're taking both things conceptually. It's not about going to the far right hand path. We're so beyond that, like, kind of trad larp life. Like, we are, like, I know that's popular on one side of Twitter, but the reality is like we're way past that. And then I think in the real world, and then and then also not taking the left hand path stuff and saying, oh, this is like, I must be transgressive against society because, like, my daddy god issues. But I also think it's not that. It's like taking it, being like, yeah, there's some really interesting ideas. There's some great theurgic tools. There's some great ways of, like, conceptual thinking that are really useful, that are very similar to Tantra, that are very similar to these other ideas. But we're not going to take it and go to, like, the extreme. But we're going to take it as, like, conceptual tools to help us get there. Whether there is Dath or there is Kether, and that's why we use the tree. Because we use the tree, we are both the builders of the tree, but we both recognize, like, the tree as it came before. Okay, yes, Matt. Sorry, please go ahead.
Just a quick one, right? You just said it, and I remembered. So if we're talking about Aetherpunk, right? If we take away the A, which sometimes is spelled as ether, we have Kether. See? Just adds a K there. Very, very good gematria. And you have Ether, Kether. So I think that's why Aetherpunk is best, actually.
Well, Matt, you're giving away all my secrets, but that's definitely what it is. I definitely also was thinking of that, and like the Aetherpunk color is pink, so, like, let's be honest, it's just like me talking about Aeon of the Daughter, but, like, in a futuristic, not just me, but it's all of us, but you get to listen to me. At least always bring it back to that, because it's like, it's the idea that never leaves me, right? It's like a love and emptiness. It's just another container to like convey that idea. And so that's what I think it is. It's like a time of synthesis. Like, yeah, let's read Left Hand Path stuff. Like, I'm all for it. Like, that. So, like, I'm like, yeah, I broke free. I broke open that klipa. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna, like, dip my toe in, read a little Don Webb, read seven yogas for postmoderns, and I'm gonna be cool, and I'm gonna, like, I'm Left Hand Path. And then I was like, the floodgates open. I was like, yeah, I read all this stuff when I was a kid. Like, let's just revisit it. And so it was like a whole genesis. And so I think it's like the revisiting of things and not being, like, stuck on the idea that I am left hand path or not. Like, I'm both or neither. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say too, like, again, just kind of thinking about this within the context of, I guess you might say, like uh politically engaged, like left hand path stuff, not the lefty variant, but like sort of like right wing, like esoteric left hand path stuff too, is like I think like the need for some degree of balance or some degree of like a positive vision, like here, like I'm not saying it has to be, you have to call it bodhicitta, I would, but it doesn't have to be that, but something to escape the kind of like cosmic nihilism, or rather like anti-cosmic strain. I don't know, there's something about how, because in the absence of being able to affect, the kind of like social change at scale that you're sort of trying to enact, so many of these things they trend towards essentially like subcultural activities that then trend toward like suicidal nihilism, right? And I'm not just saying like that in the like the O9A context, although like that's definitely like a wonderful example of that. But sort of like what happens when you can't talk about uh, or when there's absolutely sort of like no right hand grounding, or even like middle pillar grounding, right? When it's all gevura, when it's all flame, I guess, like that's been such a destructive trap for so many people, like for like multiple generations, right, of people at this point. I don't know, like I'm completely sold on the idea that you need some sort of like degree of like balance and like sort of like positive spiritual content, that it can't all be like left and like left hand, like anti-cosmic, like fuck everyone type of stuff, right? That never leads anywhere good, ever.
No, I 100% agree. That's why I like Path 22 too, because it's like very Geberatic. It's like a Geberatic path, right? So that's exactly right. But it's like the temperance of the Geberotic ideas, like the more, you could say, like I call it like the more structured spiritual practices, like the personal spiritual practices. That's what I think of it as. Like, but you could also say, like, in a more like meta political way, it is like, yeah, it's temperance through the way you want to live. Like the way you envision the world is the way you want to live. Like I'm a big, like, like I believe that. Like you should be living the way that you want the world to be in the smallest way. Like if you were like, for me, I'm pro-natalist. I don't have kids. That's a little hypocritical, but I believe in like that kind of vision for the world, like a vision where it's like normal and like good and considered like decent and like healthy and positive to like, yeah, we should be humans. We should be, in the world. We should be like in respect with each other in dialogue. But yeah, that's not always possible. That's 100% correct. I am not naive anymore. A lot of that veil has lifted for me. I've seen too much of the world now, and I recognize that that is not the reality. But I think in the way to balance the Geberotic forces, and I also think that the Hasidic forces actually have imbalanced the world in their own way, many times over. The overbearance of mercy is something I've discussed many times, but I also think the overbearance of Gebera has absolutely influence like the worst of the people. That's why I like a middle pillar approach. But middle pillar is not about being like a passive receptacle of right and left forces. It's actually being the magician. It's actually taking of the right and left forces together, the fire and the water, and making of them in synthesis and rectification, both at the same time. Yes, Matt, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see that the extreme of the right hand path would be like getting stuck, getting lost in the simulator. Like basically, trying to do it all for others or do it all for the thing for the simulator. Like being too stuck on the stories here of, let's say, I don't know, anything that would get you stuck here, right? It could be family, it could be friends, it could be whatever, money, doesn't matter. But like it's always again the problem of going too extreme, and that's what the middle pillar resolves. Like Jin beautifully said, it's you taking hand of both of them, not being attacked, let's say, being pressured by them, but actually getting hold of them. Because again, it is the one that actually balances the tree. So the topmost sphere and the bottommost sphere are in the middle. They're not on the left or the right, they're on the middle. So it's where you balance out everything, right?
Yes, Solar, please go ahead. Yes, Matt, I also agree. Great points all.
Yeah, I sort of want to ask a question on the back of what Matt just said. Because again, I'm sorry to keep coming back to Dr. Flowers. I realize that like no one else cares about this guy as much as I do, so I apologize. But it comes to mind. So one of the things that I think he was really important at instituting was this idea of like outer temple and inner temple within the context of sort of like right wing, like pagan revivalist stuff, right? So I think he was like in a leadership position in Northern Alliance at one point. Anyway, so he's like a major figure in Asatru, right? Which is the sort of what I'm calling outer temple, right? It's the sort of like normie bhakti yoga sort of thing that is totally sufficient for most people who are trying to engage in like indigenous European like practices, right? And then if you are not going to be satisfied with the sort of normie exoteric religion, well, then he has the Rune Guild, and then he's like obviously in Ipsissum is the Temple of Set, right? There are like sort of other options for people who want to go further up the tree, so to speak, right? Um, that brings to mind that the question of what does how do you distinguish, like what are some characteristics that would distinguish between an unbalanced on the sort of right pillar for an exoteric sort of spiritual practice, something that's accessible and kind of like normgroid, right, versus a sort of like more balanced uh sustainable middle pillar practice for like exoteric in the exoteric context. And I know that most of the people here like speaking and listening uh are not in this tax bracket spiritually, so to speak. But I do think that's an important consideration to kind of keep in mind. Like I always consider what the sort of downstream exoteric like normie version is of what I'm doing, because I think that one, it's important for like intelligibility, right, of people to understand what I'm doing vaguely, right? But also like it's important to try to understand like the wider social implications like for your beliefs, right? Like is the thing that you're doing sort of like intelligible and sustainable? Does it like build strong communities and does it sort of like make sense at the 100 IQ level, right? But anyway, so like yeah, like our because I feel like it's very easy for us to just kind of talk about like more exoteric kind of basic practices as being it's just inherently like right pillar and da da da. And I'm just curious if you have any insight on that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to let you go, Matt. I'll be really quick, I promise. Vajrasattva is a middle pillar practice, right? Because he sits on a Yasodic moon disk. So, in my direct answer, like if I wasn't to give like a Jin answer, I will say just like everybody could just do Vajrasattva. You could do loyal as exercises if you're more Christian. You could read Saint Francis of Assisi. He wrote all the odes and the canticles, and those are very, very kabbalistic, but they're also very normy. They're very accessible. You could do the rosary practice. You could do um, text reading, but text reading can be very tamasic. But you need to you need some kind of active process that blends both visualization with text practice, and also maybe something spoken. So there are lots of Christian meditations. There's obviously Buddhism, Vajrasattva. If you're like a Hindu Dharmic, then you could do like any mantra japa, any of that, like nama japas, no problem. But you should be doing those like many times a day. It's like if you're doing nama japas, that's like the outer of the outers, and I agree. And I remember you asking a really good question about the outer and the inner temper solar on the episode, so that was really great. But no, I'm a big believer in this, like that it has existed. But I think that if you want my true answer, I'll say this. I think the people in the secret temple are people who've been up the tree. I think that it's their job, quote unquote, their job, to bring other people like into fuller awareness in a dharmic way. So I think that's the secret temple. So that could be whomever, and also we kind of recognize each other. I'm not saying me necessarily, but I'm saying there's something that other magicians recognize in other magicians or magi. Yeah, as you all know, I prefer that word. That some magi see in others that they can recognize certain degrees of wisdom or knowledge. So I also think that that's the inner temple, the true inner temple, rather than than it being a physical order or physical institution. It's brothers of the higher knowledge who bring like everyone else into like a greater understanding of the cosmos. That's what I really think it is. Okay, yes, Matt, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say it's easier if you try to see it from which sphere the practice works. Like it, at least from my understanding, in a way, if you're doing outer temple things, it in theory should be like Malchut or Yesod, because again, it's very in the beginning, right? So in theory, it should already be middle pillar, though things can be changed and whatever, right? Yeah, you can try different things and so on. But a nice way to gauge it as well is, at least from the way I understand it, is left pillar being things that you do for yourself or with the focus on the self, and right pillar focus on the others, focus on the simulator, the things that are outside, right? So if you are doing anything that is more tilted towards one of these, so let's say if you're doing a type of practice which is basically self self-sacrifice, right? Like just doing something for others and so on. Maybe it's too much to the right pillar. Not that it's wrong. Again, you can and should work all of them, all the spheres, all the columns. At least I believe this. You should just balance things in the middle, or the opposite way. Like if you're doing something too for yourself, like you're doing, I don't know, some practice that is only related to you for your gain, for your benefit, and so on, for that only you are in the middle of it and so on, then again it could be tilting too much to the left column. And by the way, I don't think, at least I would say I actually laughed a lot when Solar said, probably people are not in the spiritual tax bracket because I agree to a degree. Like maybe if you're not in that tax bracket, you shouldn't even be thinking about this kind of things. But if you are, then I guess it's a very interesting exercise actually. Like what Jin was saying, right? If you are up the tree and you are organizing something like this, you should be able to tell how would you organize. You know, it's kind of like you're trying to manage a company, but it's like what is the goal of the company? It's not really money, but it's like spiritual progress, right? So it's a very very interesting challenge, and trying to gauge that in the exoteric like works, it is very interesting, but also in a way, I'd say you cannot really like protect the thing. I'll say protect is the word, because let's say you just put ideas out there, then it's there. Like people can take and try to do whatever they want, right? Or even sometimes you will try to use terms and other people will use other terms. Like the other day, I think we were talking about in the chat about this other kind of tree of life with the numbers thing. I forgot the name, that numogram or whatever. It's like, again, it's just, again, it's fucking Kabbalah. Somebody wants to put another name into it and sell it as it's another complete different thing. It's like, no, bro. But or in the same way, like I was I all the time. It's so funny. I actually laugh a lot. People see in my profile or whatever that I'm talking about Kabbalah, and they will try and call me like Jewish or something, and I'm like, sure, bro. Yes. I just laugh a lot. I accept it, man. Well, what can I say? You know, it's not even the only one that exists, but it's again, it's kind of what's in there. Like if you search for it, obviously the Jewish one is what's going to pop up. So it's hard to keep track, I'd say.
Yes, brother Solar, please go ahead. That was great, Matt.
Yeah, not beating the allegations. It's okay. No one in this chat is beating the allegations. Yeah, so one of the most sort of like interesting little like portable like micro concepts that I've picked up just looking through like temple set material is this notion of individuals, all individuals, but imagine, sort of like initiated individuals act as sort of like conduits for different whether you want to say different Aeonic words, whether you want to use the Egyptian framing and say like the individual sort of like embodies the neter, right, which is both the god but also sort of the principle, right, in a Platonic sense, right. So I guess like this to me was actually sort of like a helpful way of thinking about sort of like what we're doing as we sort of like move through different spaces, different communities, as we engage with the world, right, in terms of like network theory. Like you can view yourself as like think about it like in an RPG, right? Like you have a certain number of like auras going or like buffs that you're like giving out, right? And you're saying like I am a vector for not just one idea, right? Because no one is that simple. No one can be reduced to a single sort of like principle or idea, unless that, I guess that happens to be bodhicitta. Don't quote me or whatever. But you get the idea. So you can sort of like be cognizant of like what ideas am I not just like using to sort of like order and orient my own life, but sort of like what am I allowing myself in my life and my sort of work, magical and otherwise, to be a vector for, right? Like what, and it doesn't have to be universal, right? Like I can bring sort of like different ideas and ideals, different priorities to different communities, right? And I can act with intention, and that's in fact what I do. I mean, I've said this before, but like a lot of my sort of political activity is I'm interested in pushing specific groups and communities that I'm a part of, right? Over the course of years in particular directions, right? And that's not a universal thing. It's this group, I want to go in this direction, so I will do this, right? But yeah, just like thinking of like what your sort of Aeonic stack is, right? Or your netter stack, or your yeah, just like the sort of like values that flow in and through you outward into the world, but again, getting sort of granular with like different spaces and communities, I think is helpful, and it's both empowering, right? Like it allows you to think in a very like active sense, but then it also keeps you honest, because it's like, well, am I really acting as sort of an amplifier, as this sort of conduit of bodhicitta, or am I being an insufferable prick? Like one of the two. And you can evaluate like, concrete instances, behaviors, etc., really like openly and honestly. Like what am I actually putting into the world versus like, what are my intentions? Again, it's basic, but I don't know. I found it helpful.
No, I think that was really great, Solar. I think that okay, so just give the Buddhist example or the Buddhist kind of response, or I'll try my best to be a good vehicle for Dharma as an imperfect vessel myself. I think the idea is that you're skillful. You increase in your skillfulness. The skillful means your upaya. You increase in that, the more you increase in knowledge. So, increase in knowledge, increase in non-dual gnosis. That's also a way, I think, to really understand not just Gnostic texts, but also left-hand path texts through non-dualism. I know Dr. Flowers has a very different sort of definition of that than, and maybe he's drawing from other sources. I'm just not familiar enough, but I'm just only familiar really with the explanations from Naropa, Chandrakriti, and also like the Anuttara Yoga Tantras. So for me, non-dualism has very little to do with morality, almost nothing, because it's ontological. So I guess, yeah, but non-dual gnosis is a way to increase your skillfulness because you'll start to understand what is able to carry the seeds of your particular will through your kind of acknowledgement and awareness of what we call it, like the Dharma stream or the Dharmakaya. So yeah, you could say that. Yeah, I think you could apply what I just said to like your example. Okay, Matt, sorry, please go ahead.
So while Solar was talking, I got reminded of something that happened last week, which was very interesting. So, like I'm a person which in the last few years got more accustomed to the idea of just sharing whatever the fuck I want to share in whatever platform I want to share. Obviously, I don't share the same things in all platforms. Like I'm not the same in Twitter as I am in work or in Instagram or whatever. But I do not hold a lot as well. It's just different communications. But what I'm trying to say is, for example, I started talking about Kabbalah, right? And it's to the point of even being sometimes obnoxious, I'll say, maybe if I'm the other person, but I don't care really because I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it because I don't know, I see it happen, something, and then I'm like, fuck, this is very Kabbalistic. And then I want to talk about it. And it happens that I'm talking to someone else or whatever, and they get to listen to me talking about it because I also try to make it not super mystical, right? If I'm talking, like the other day, I did a Kabbalah lesson in work, but I didn't talk about Kabbalah. I just used the Trail of Life and everything, but I didn't mention Kabbalah, but it was a Kabbalah lesson. They don't need to know, but it's like also for my own entertainment and for the at least my intention to help others learn something. So again, it's working both columns and rectifying in the middle. But what I was gonna say is, I got a message from an ex-student of mine, not a Kabbalah student, anything like just programming, that she actually started watching my videos back when I just started, and then she at the beginning didn't understand anything and so on. She was also raised, I think it's called Protestant in English. Like in Brazil, it's a different name, but I think the equivalent is like Protestant. So she wasn't never really into those kind of things, and she was like, okay, this kind of bollocks or whatever. But because she respected me as a professor, right, as like a person, then she's like, okay, let me at least try to listen. And then she grew to the idea, and now she's kind of studying those things. And I was fucking super happy about it. Not because, let's say, I co-opted someone into the Kabbalah culture or whatever, but because, again, it's something that I'm only doing for my own interest in the beginning. That obviously I have the intention of helping others if somebody gets help with this, but it's what Sora was saying, is it really what you're doing or what you're practicing and thinking about? Can you actually also apply it in the world? It's not something just in your head, right? Can you live it? And what are the seeds? If you're a node in the network, how can your energy or aura or whatever pass down through other nodes? Like I saw this happen also with my family. Let's say I'm practicing Kabbalah. My family was already a bit open spiritually, so it was easier to talk to them about this kind of things. But I see how my practices started to reflect on their lives and practices. Not because now they are also Kabbalists, but because we can, again, be in synthesis. In like we can exchange ideas and be in synthesis, and both like everyone grows. Because again, everyone is like exchanging information, exchanging experiences, and so on. So that's to me, again, I always come back to this point. You don't have to study necessarily a super crazy spiritual system or whatever. If you want, go for it. But just make sure to do one thing right. Like one thing that you do it all until the end. And it's going to be the same. Like if you get tennis and you try to be the best tennis player ever, it's going to be the equivalent of doing something really good that you get to experience with others and so on. Eventually, when you get to the point of studying spirituality, you're just going to connect all the dots. You're going to be like, oh, okay, what the fuck? Like you're going to see how those things that you did were spiritually. But that only happens if you go deep into the work. Like again, you gotta raise closest to Qatar as you can. So it doesn't matter if you're raising through tennis or music or whatever, right? You're just gonna try and raise it somehow. So that's also a note to myself, especially that sometimes I don't need to speak about Kabbalah necessarily. Like with that name, I can just speak about something, and at the end of the day, I know it's Kabbalah. It doesn't matter. But I know, like for the other person, it can be helpful. Like just showing the symbol. That's it. Sometimes it's just a symbol. You show them, it stays in their minds, and it's a seed. If they let it grow, good for them. If they don't, doesn't matter as well. Like again, you can approach it with the two columns, because you can approach it with the idea that you are trying to do it because you want to learn more about it and you want to expand your own ideas, but also with the intention of helping others. So you have both columns there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, middle pillar, that's where it's at, It's like that's where all the all the cool magi go. I don't know. Yeah, I know. I totally agree, Matt. Like I'm pretty weird. I don't like introduce myself being like, "Yo, I'm like a tantric Buddhist." Like that's not my like way, but I'm sure people can tell that I'm not quite. It's not quite like I don't keep kosher or anything, so like it's obvious that it's like something else, right? So and that's fine, and I was always a bit of a wizard. I'm just gonna be honest. Like I've told this story before on Spaces of like carrying Uncle Sec Knocked. I think I said that properly. That time, I used to carry that around high school because I thought it was like real edgelord, like Don Webb. So and so I did that. So that's my story about that. So but what Matt was saying, like bringing everything into synthesis, like to tie it back to like what seemed like a weird Puranic tantric meandering, perhaps at the beginning. That's what the sun is. That's what the Kumar is. It's what Christ is. It's like six. It's like Tiferet. It's like coming back into that higher state. Like you're constantly synthesizing. You're constantly accumulating new knowledge, or not accumulating. Excuse me. You're constantly disaggregating new information. It's very Hode-like, right? Like what Matt was talking about, but it's also very Tiferatic. You're like learning all these new things, all these modalities, all these new path workings, all the ways of the world. Very McLuhan, actually. It's like all the nodes, like very Sephirotic. Like you're traveling, you're creating the paths, you're like dispersing the ideas outwards, but you're trying to bring it into a singular will solar. So you're trying to bring it into a single point, but you have to do so in what? Love. So you have to kind of bring ideas into both synthesis and rectification at the same time. That means that the things that we thought of the past, at least if you want to really describe this Kabbalistically. So we'll just say that it's not my opinion per se as Jin, I'm just describing a Kabbalistic kind of speculative idea, is that the things that came before cannot inherently exist now because things have progressed so much. So we've reached a place of imbalance, but balance can happen within us. And so we are the ones who have to kind of undertake these processes and enact them. And then perhaps on a metapolitical level, we can then enact our maybe forged and also slightly collectivized will, simply because we have like higher intentions. Maybe that's an interesting idea. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say something, and it actually it shined light on a question that I need to ask. That's far more important than anything I was going to affirmatively contribute. Okay, so I just realized now, and I can't believe I've never sort of like systematically thought about it, but I don't have to because I can just ask you and Matt, and anyone else who wants to contribute. So how would you conceptualize duty, in the sort of Evolian sense of the duty of the kshatriya, right? Um, in a Kabbalistic way, right? Like, how would you? Because there's aspects of so many trees, and it does seem, or sorry, so many spheros, and it does seem to kind of uh, sort of orbit around Tiferet, right? But it's not exact because I was thinking of this the kind of like like the sort of non-emotional sort of transcendent notion of love that bodhicitta kind of gets at, that is like very very similar to chesed, but it's not really one to one either. And because I was trying to think of I sorry, I was just thinking back to the sort of the heroic aspects, the heroic and mysterious romantic aspects of Aetherpunk, right? And I was going to connect it to this whole Evolian thing, but then I realized the question of duty is actually, which is something that's very sort of near and dear to me, and I think appeals to a lot of folks who would sort of organically gravitate towards, you know, Guinan and Evola's critique of the modern world and sort of what their positive prescriptions are for a return to something vastly different and superior. But I've never tried to make sense of that, sort of like in a Kabbalistic schema, and I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Okay, I know Matt raises his hand, and I should technically let him, but I'm gonna jump in really quick. Is that so? I'll just say it from the Puranic perspective. It's like the deity I listed at the very beginning, Kumara. He is actually the god, the Ishtadevata of Kestriyas everywhere. So he represents the, you could say, the cosmological deity archetype of all warriors in all places. So he is both Geberatic and Tiferatic at the same time if you look at his colors, but there's also a code-like quality because he's also the prince. Now, it does depend on whether he is depicted as a bachelor or with his consorts. Sometimes one or two, depends. So he's very Geberatic, he's Tiferatic, and there's also something Hode-like about him. But he has to be equally balanced. That's often why he's depicted with both wives. He's in the center, and they're on either side, plus an ultra. That's what balances him out. Anyways, I don't know. Okay, Matt, please go ahead.
Okay, so while you were talking about duty, especially, I was thinking about that. I agree, it's not necessarily something Tiferatic, but it does orbit. So I would say it's kind of like, to me, I see it happening in Hesed, Gevra, and Tiferet. So it can be seen as, for example, the hangman path. Again, it's this idea of like sacrificing, right? Like you're doing it for others but it has to be a valid sacrifice, right? It has to be like a dharmic sacrifice you're doing, not just, oh, I'm gonna go to this thing because my girlfriend asked to, even if I don't want to go. It's like, no, that's bullshit. That's like nobody cares. A valid sacrifice has to be something that actually you're doing, again, not in the social obligation kind of thing, but in the dharmic sense of things, right? You could also see it, I see it at least, is as this kind of like Martian idea. So again, very Giferatic, maybe at least in the configuration that I use, the strength card, which is the 11th, is actually Hesed to is it Hesed to Netzach? Yeah, it's Hesed to Netzach, but it's connected to Mars as well. So again, in the astrological way, it would be a Martian thing. So kind of Gevra as well. So it kind of, I would say it orbits around there, not only on the Sephira, but also on the paths between them. At least from like top of my head. Maybe also something with the letter Shin. So at least I connected with the Fool, but other people connected in other ways. But something there as well, I don't know, kind of says to me something about like duty, you know, the letter itself, not necessarily the path.
I actually think that Matt was getting at something really interesting. Is that I think that actually duty would rise on a path. And I think that one thing really interesting about the Uranus or Kether, if you want to say that, or Aquarian, depending on like your preferences, right? You could say that it's also Chinnamasta, if you're going to compare it to a Mahavijja, she who severs her own head. Who is she standing on? She's standing on the god Kama, the god of carnal knowledge, meaning sexual knowledge, but also in this case, it's also carnal ground knowledge, and Ratri, the goddess of carnal desire. Okay? Really important. That's why I did that weird accent to emphasize it. Because it's really important. And so she sacrifices herself, but it's not really herself, it's just conceptually. Conceptually. She sacrifices herself to become post conceptual, outside of the material lust. That does not mean the path of celibacy, especially in Shakti Tantra, because it's the path of the householder. Why am I saying all this? Because I think that duty actually arises, if you really want to put it very, very clearly, on the paths, but it's not about lust per se. It's about conquering those kinds of things. Like, we know we live in a hypersexual, hyper-saturated culture. The Zoomers are supposedly less sexual. They put all the all the drugs in the water to make like the trans kids or whatever. This is probably true too. Um, there's kind of like weird things happening, and like, but I also think it's like not necessarily. This is how I think of it. Solar is like, I think of it's kind of like the balance between like, you're not going to embrace like sex party craziness, and you're not also going to embrace like, it doesn't have to be like Puritanville. We can just like, everybody gets a little space, but you don't get like how did they say it on Twitter? Like, your body count can't be above X or XY, whatever. Like, you kind of normalize, you kind of rationalize, you kind of bring it back into logos, bring it back into logic, bring it back into rhetoric. Like, you kind of like can have discussions like we're having, like very honest ones, and then you just say, okay, like, let's normalize some of these opinions, let's constrict them. That's what I often think of as missing, like the Banah element. That like, that's not negative. It's just, you need to define what you're talking about. So you sometimes you have to constrict. That's good. That's important. Like, constrict ideologically, and that also means excising. That's very Binah and Gevra at the same time. You're kind of slicing away, right? All the stupidity, all the retardsville shit. Like, you're just saying this isn't useful. That's very Rime. And as you know, Solar just read A Lamp Upon the Darkness. I can't remember the exact title. I apologize. But it's by Jumipom Rinpoche. He was the founder of the Rime movement, which is the synthesis movement. That's what Rime means. It's the movement of synthesis. And he read all the different tantric texts, Shrivijaya, Bhairava, Gelugpa, like all the different texts. And he's like, this works, this doesn't seem to work, this isn't in keeping with our view. And so his idea was that we have to kind of arise in duty to the truth. And so that is what I always say for Anne of the Daughter. It's like the truth has become decoherent. So it becomes up to us to define and give meaning to and context to. And I think that's also what speculative space is, not just this space, but just speculative ideas in the Aether Wave, along surfing, Quicksilver surfing the Aether Wave. That's what they can do, is they can kind of generate the world as we will it. I don't know. Just I think that's an interesting idea of why we host these crazy spaces, and why I think they actually have tons of potential. And they are very Hokmah. I'm very Hokmah. I think we're all very attracted to Hokmah because it is like crazy wisdom, as the Buddhist would say, Joyan. or maybe it's like the smoky carnal palace beyond the end of the end, as some would also say. So it's kind of a wild and crazy place, and we live in a wild and crazy world. At least that's how that's how it often presents itself. So I don't know. That might be a good place to start to close out. What do you guys think, Matt and Solar?
It's funny. I was gonna say, because I have to run one way or the other. So I was gonna say that's an awesome place for me. Thank you both for kind of the composite answer I got. I'm really happy with that, and that's gonna be a guidepost for my future thinking on the topic. So I greatly appreciate it, and just thanks for everyone for being here. I love these spaces and look forward to these. So thank you all.
Thank you, Solar, very much. Appreciate you, brother. Frater Dark Lord. Everybody, you can follow Solar. He doesn't post that much, but he's been a lot more active, and I'm trying. And thank you, of course, Solar, for hosting and for all future episodes that will drop soon. I'm almost caught up. I need one more week, and I'll be all the way there. And then, of course, thank you, Matt, and I'll thank you after again. But thank you, Solar. Really appreciate it. You've helped me. I've evolved. I've tried to we'll call it shed the skin of that puritanical sort of like 2023 trad bro movement that I didn't really get caught up in it, but I was kind of like, this might be a useful rhetorical tool, but then you start to believe your own bullshit and you're like, oh, okay. So thank you for that. And yeah, it kind of woke me up and brought me back into synthesis, brought me back into the middle. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. And obviously, I look forward to these spaces as well, not just because I get to do a really cool, fun kind of like speculative exercise in front of you all live, but also because I get to speak with Matt and Solar, and that's a big part of it. And obviously, Joshua, the branch, and Monty when he comes. So thank you guys so much. And Matt, please close yourself and plug anything you want to plug, and everybody should follow Matt as well.
Thanks everyone who listened. Obviously, thanks Jin for hosting. Thanks Solar for co-hosting. It's always amazing to do these. Always excited for them. And again, it's very nice how always they connect to something in the week, kind of like my Kabbalah classes. So it's very interesting, very synchronistic. But yeah, thanks again everyone who's listening. Matt Mora here. Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, gematria, whatever you name it. It's just names, really. It's all Kabbalah at the end of the day. So if you like spiritual stuff, tech stuff, be sure to follow me. I post some interesting things. I will come back to posting videos now. Yeah, got some what's it called, like whatever, I forget the word right now. But basically, yeah, somebody in the spiritual realms is kind of making me do it again. But I actually wanted to do as well, so it was kind of both ways. That's nice. And also posting some cool apps that I built related to spirituality. So if you like those, be sure to follow me to not miss a thing. Thanks again.
Thank you, Matt. Always my homie. Like, I literally look to you and Rom always for approval because, of course, I have the millennial consciousness, and we always look to like the who we perceive as like in touch with that current, you could say, because it is a current. To understand what that is, like what the zeitgeist is, and so you always look to the young princes of Hode, you could say, to travel the current or to at least to be tapped in. So I know you guys give me a hard time, but I did give Rom a really hard time by saying I don't like any Deftones songs. But I also said I didn't hate anything. I just didn't like anything. It just was like very neutral for me. True neutral with EV. Yes, Matt, please go ahead.
Okay, just something real quick because I went to the concert, right, of Deftones, and it was crazy that there was so many girls crying their balls out. I was like, what the hell do these guys did in the music to like have so many people having breakdowns and shit? I was like, what the fuck? So very magical, interesting. I noted down. Okay, I gotta see what these guys do, because there's something there.
It's so funny because it is kind of like there's something emo, kind of like very, I don't know, like late 90s about it, maybe early 2000s. Like, yeah, there is kind of a like an old tune sound to it. There is. I'm just being honest. And maybe that's why I like shoegaze, but Deftones seem to embody it the worst. So let me just say that. So maybe I'm too old to really enjoy it. Okay, Solar, please go ahead.
No, no, this will be my last comment. Then I got dip. I think there's something we can almost call magical about being like a Zoomer, right? Like being a far too young of a man to be around these like aging, washed like cam girls, like right, just like having their sort of like mid 30s like moments to the Deftones, right? Because you're so sort of like dissociated and removed from this, right? You cannot possibly participate in whatever is happening with them, that you're just like stuck as an observer, right? Like I love those moments, right? Like yeah, I mean it's really corny if you like, go out seeking them, but when they just occur because you're here for some other band or whatever, and then you're just like you just get thrust into the middle of this like strange ritual that just is not for you or even comprehensible by you. Like that shit's awesome, man. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, brother Solar. Appreciate you. Yeah, no, he's totally right. Like there's such just a magical thing that happens in a concert. It's undeniable. So, if you cry your heart out to Deftones, I would actually wonder what's mentally deficient in you or like what your childhood trauma was, but to each their own, really. I don't know. That I'm not saying they're bad. I don't know. It's like okay. But Solar did say something funny, like what is like the carnal ground is the world because it is like full of like these cam girls and like just like mentally unstable podcasters. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about so many other ones and just like everything. I just think it's like that's the carnal ground. It's not about like hurting things or hurting yourself or like restricting so much like being an ascetic or ascetic, but it's about like yeah, you can taste like what's on offer, but like can you moderate yourself? Because that's like that's a powerful thing about will. Like I know Solar left, but like that's really powerful to say no, to say like I don't actually, just because my body says something, whether it's hunger or lust, doesn't matter, can you say no? Because that's truly your will. When you get to say no to those like kinds of like animal, you could say animalistic. And I'm not even saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying, maybe more basal impulses, maybe more yesodic impulses. Can you like disaggregate from the feeling itself, from the sense pleasure itself? It doesn't mean restricting all the time. It just means like when that happens, can you say no? And sometimes you have to say no, and so that's also like a very aeonic kind of idea, is like it's not just like Nema said it was ipsos, right? And Frater Achad said it was love, but he used a Hebrew word. I think it was lahova or ahava or something like that. Anyways, I forgot already. Also, I smoked a lot of weed tonight, but okay. So, hello, Cassandra. Thank you so much for coming. We're literally just about to close out, but we really appreciate you. Thank you, content creator, Gnostic, Kabbalah, tarot card reader, also fortune card reader. Thank you so much for coming. We always appreciate you. This is an Aeon of the Daughter space. Like I said it was a joke from the earlier statement. I said it's kind of the reason why I can host these spaces is because I get to sort of create maybe vessels or husks, not really husks, but vessels around Aeon of the Daughter so I can kind of preserve it longer. It's kind of an interesting idea. So I definitely do that. But, all things arise in synthesis and all things arise in rectification. And if you ever wonder what the Aeon of the Daughter, like what the fuck was that kid talking about? Not that I'm a kid, I'm definitely not. But if you were wondering what I ever meant by that, that's what I meant. Synthesis and rectification both at the same time. And it's like learning that where those things can be the same as well. That's what I think is really important. So, like when Solar was talking about like what's the rectification for the left-hand path, the rectification for the left-hand path is to stop believing that you are left-hand path. That is your identity. That is your klipa. You just let it go like a husk. You don't have to be a black magician. Just be a magician. I'm serious. Just be a magician. You don't have to be even gray. Just be a magician. Just be like a person who synthesizes and without aggregation. Because isn't it aggregation to say, I'm a white brotherhood magician, I'm a black brotherhood magician, I'm going to take sides, we're going to play Blood and Crips magic style, right? What's the point in that? Is that really truly knowing your will? It's always team sports. You know, we always joke about Masonic theater, but like, is it knowing your will to play team sports? Like, yeah, maybe it is your will to like apply a little pressure here or there or whatever. But and we've talked about that too. It's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you have to do that. But sometimes it's also about like recognizing it for what it is and being able to totally walk away. You know, flay the husk and throw it in the carnal fire. So just like discard those identities of like rigidity and like fixed ideas and fixed states, and remember it's like dancing in the carnal fire. And that's what like the aeonic key word is. It's really like love without desire. That doesn't mean you'll never have desire, and it doesn't mean desire is even bad. It's not bad. It's just like, does it align with your will, and can you bring it into synthesis in love, which is really just synthesis, but you're bringing it into synthesis in love. Like you're using love as kind of your flux, your kind of alchemical agent, you could say. Just like Fifth Element. I always tell this to Rom, just go watch Fifth Element. It explains and of the daughter perfectly, and the also elemental configuration, right? And it does. Because what is she? The fifth element? And so 5 plus 5 is what? 10, which is the wholeness, the fullness, the 1 and the 0. The alpha and the omega. You know, it's Vajrakalaya, or that's one of the higher deities with his sky wife. Then that's what it is. It's like, that's what really it is. It's like the 0 and the 1, the circle, the spinning wheel, and the single pointed will. So that's a great place for us to close out. Thank you so much. Obviously, we'll do a room shout out. Matt Murrah, amazing co-host. Thank you so much for being patient. John, Space Answered, the funniest Kiwi in our lodge by far, Astro. Please check him out if you're interested in having your chart done by. It's obviously monetary, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Sir Tim of the Tunnels, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you. You've been so active in the chat. Appreciate you. Cassandra, thank you so much for popping in. Really appreciate you. Always welcome in Dakini. Thank you so much. Gnostic Kabbalah, jewelry maker. Please check out her channel and her Etsy link, which is in her bio. Thank you so much. Zach Schumar, co-host, saint many times over. Thank you so much for coming. Much obliged. Content creator, musician, all around great dude. Glass enjoyer, we'll call him. And so thank you so much for coming. I love seeing you here. It's obviously great to get the bros back together. Shakti, Japanese Zucchini Queen, thank you so much for coming. Joseph Reed, Dr. Joseph Reed, artist and scholar in residence, holding the McLuhan chair, we'll call it, for the Grey Lodge. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you. Ram, Singapore, Frater Singapura, who was the genesis for this space and its ideas, Aetherpunk, Teknologies of a Hyperspace Kingdom, which is drawing from solar punk, but it's also drawing from lunar punk. You could actually say, which we didn't talk about, so we should have talked about lunar punk, but we could say that Aetherpunk is actually the synthesis of solar punk and lunar punk. So that kind of anarchic with that hidden, as Solar perfectly said, it's kind of like that Singaporean hidden fascist city-state model. That's solar punk, and lunar punk is sort of like anarchist, longhouse commune, like kibbutzim idea. And it's like both are a little too much. So you gotta, bring those things into synthesis and also set them free, both at the same time. So that's Aether punk. A bit liberatory, a bit fuck you to the archons, and a bit innovative and experimental. So that's basically it. And then Fluid Flow. Thank you so much, Fluid Flow. Longtime mutual, much obliged. And of course, last but definitely not least, Mookie, our crow Dakini from our lodge. Thank you so much, Bird Rescuer, which is a very Kabbalistic act, a very magical act to rescue hurt animals. It is. Rectifies a lot of paths. I'm just telling you. I'm not saying you have to do it. I don't do it. Like, I don't. I'm incapable of doing it personally. but I have a big soft heart and I love animals. So, it's a great way. Animals, gardening, is many of you know, I'm fond of that because that is also a Kabbalistic act. Can be an act of rectification. Very good for Malkuth, Netzach. Um, it actually can be of other Sephira too, because it can also be very Hod and very of the will and very like of. But it can also become about desire. But then what's interesting about gardening is it can never really be fully contained. It's kind of wild, right? There's something kind of impermanent, Dharmic about it. So that is the benefit of gardening, is you have to learn to let things go. Conceptual thinking, you have to just learn to let it go. Sometimes plants don't work, even if it's a perfect location supposedly for them. Sometimes you just have to let the old ideas go. And sometimes you have to think for yourself. That's a big part of gardening, is actually not listening to what's online or what people tell you, and sometimes just like being like, yeah, actually, like I've done that many times. This plant won't transplant, or this is better in the full sun. No, I've actually had a lot more luck actually doing the inverse. I'm just saying there's a lot of corrupted knowledge, so sometimes you have to try for yourself, very Hod like, very experimental, right? But we always bring it back down into the garden. So we're kind of working in a perfect synthesis of the two. We're working with the forces as they are. Yes, we're adding new things, we're hybridizing, we're making things more hardy. That's Hod like too. There's nothing wrong with that. Working in tune with the energies, going with the dragon current, flowing in flux, resonating at both Tiferet and Yesod, both at the same time. Okay, so I'm Jin the Ninja. This was Plus Ultra Presents The Grey Lodge Aetherpunk, a series within a series, a vessel within a series. Very cool, if you ask me. Good job, Jen. Technologies of a Hyperspace Kingdom. Welcome to Hyperborea, Arc 5, Part 2. So that means that next week will be Part 3 of Aetherpunk, and I haven't quite decided. We said Technologies. I think that was building off Matt's idea. Sorry, Matt, for not crediting you, but I believe it was a Matt wanted a kind of thing on the kind of framework, a technology, and architecture. And so this was, obviously we didn't talk about architecture, but maybe we did, because talking about the tree is inherently talking about architecture, because there is no architecture without Kabbalah. So true. So people can cry about it, they can call you Jewish, they can call it kayfabe about it, but the reality is like, you're not beating the allegations. Architecture is just Kabbalah, just like are most things, as Matt would say and agree with, just as are most things. So, with that being said, I'm Jin the Ninja. I host a show called Threshold Saints. Many of the co-hosts have been, or all of the co-hosts have been guests upon, or future guests, and many of the lodge members have been guests, if they so will, and will be future guests, of course. And we are a metamagical space, speculative Gnostic gospel. Obviously, that's what Welcome to Hyperborea is, a speculative Gnostic gospel for the new American Magi. Pretty good. Someone, I think it was Brother Dingbat, he said how good my naming convention was, which, by the way, is very Hod-like. So my reputation, however, like, self-described that may be, of being the dark Sephirotic prince, actually remains true. So just remember that going forward. Just kidding. No, it's all good. Okay, everybody go in love and peace, and just bring the splendor in the things you do. Like, live the way you want to live. Don't worry about the archons. Put that outside of your mind. Like, just live the way you want to live. Be free, be weird, be Sephirotic, be empty, and be in love. Because what else is there? There's not that much else. So that's it. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.